I learned a long time ago that some places in America don't die quietly. They linger in the dust, clinging to the last breath of the people who once called them home, whispering their unfinished stories through the wind and the abandoned doorframes. And on a cold October morning last year, I drove my old Volkswagen Westphalia straight into one of those places without knowing it. I wasn't searching for trouble or ghosts or anything dramatic. I was just trying to out myself for a while. But sometimes the road doesn't take you where you want to go. It takes you where you need to face something. I'd been camping in Volkswagen since I was 16. My dad used to say those vans were the last honest vehicles left in America. Slow, stubborn, but always telling the truth about the road ahead. After he passed, I started taking longer trips, drifting between national forests, forgotten highways, and the kinds of towns you only hear about in stories told around campfires. This trip was supposed to be simple. Just me, my van, and the open desert stretching like a blank page. But somewhere along Highway 50, where the landscape turns into a tangle of dirt roads and rusted signs, I felt a strange pull. Not a voice exactly, but an instinct, like the ground was nudging me down a path I hadn't considered. Her name was Marlene. That's what the sign said. Marlene, Pop, 48. Except someone had scratched out the numbers long ago, leaving only the ghost of a population. I almost kept driving, but the road into town was lined with cottonwoods, and the last of the afternoon light made their branches glow like lanterns. I hadn't slept well in days, and the thought of a quiet place to park the van for the night felt like a gift. Marlene wasn't completely abandoned, not in the dramatic collapsed buildings way. It looked more like a town paused in the middle of a sentence, a diner with faded curtains, a gas station with one pump still standing, a row of small houses where the wind moved the loose siding like someone shifting in their sleep. No people, no cars, not even stray dogs, just that heavy, expectant stillness that comes right before a storm or after a tragedy. I parked near an old RV campground behind the diner. The sign was hanging crooked, the letters sun-bleached, Desert Bloom RV Park. The iron gate stood open. A few old concrete pads and electric posts marked where RVs once lined up like migrating birds. My Volkswagen felt out of place, like I'd driven into someone else's memory. But the sky was turning violet, and desert nights don't care about hesitation. So I leveled the van, cracked a window for the cool air, and started heating water for instant coffee. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't strong, but it was distinct, like burned sage mixed with something metallic. It drifted through the van in a way that made my skin tighten. I stepped outside, expecting to see a campfire somewhere, maybe a local who still lived in town. But the campground was empty. No smoke, no embers, nothing but the wind brushing through dry weeds. I told myself it was the desert playing tricks. Smells travel differently out here. They linger, they twist, they echo memories you don't have. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that someone had been standing close to me just a moment before. I walked toward the office trailer at the edge of the campground. The door was cracked open, tapping softly in the breeze as if someone had left in a hurry. I pushed it with 2 fingers, half expecting it to resist, but it swung easily. The interior smelled like dust and old paper. A faded map of Nevada was still pinned to the wall. A coffee mug sat on the counter with a ring of dried brown at the bottom. Everything in that office looked like someone intended to return, except no one ever did. I signed the makeshift logbook out of habit. Name, date, the color of the van. There was no need to pay. The cash box was empty and the instructions were bleached from the sun. But writing my name anchored me somehow. It made me feel like I wasn't trespassing. On the way back to the van, I caught a flicker of movement near one of the empty pads. A shadow, low to the ground. I froze, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Desert animals weren't uncommon, but something about this shape was wrong. Too slow, too deliberate. When I stepped closer, though, it dissolved into nothing, just my eyes playing tricks. That's what I told myself. Inside the van, the temperature dropped faster than it should have. The desert cools quickly, but this felt unnatural. like something pulling heat out of the air rather than the sun simply setting. I turned on the small heater I kept in the van, set my mug down, and tried to shake off the feeling crawling beneath my ribs. I always kept a journal when I traveled, not for memories, but to keep my mind from spiraling. Anxiety runs in my family. It's the kind of thing you think you can outrun until you find yourself sitting in a quiet room listening for sounds that aren't there. As I wrote about the odd stillness of Marlene, my pen scratched louder than usual, each letter exaggerated in my ears. The van walls felt too thin, the windows too dark. At some point, the heater clicked off. I didn't notice immediately. My attention was caught by something else, a sound, faint, distant, rhythmic. 3 knocks. Then silence. 3 knocks again. Not the wind, not footsteps. Knocking. Steady, patient, like someone testing a door they weren't sure they wanted to open. I held my breath until my chest hurt. It didn't come from the van. It came from the empty campground. I couldn't see anything from the window. The darkness pressed against the glass like a living thing. But the knocks came again, closer this time, echoing off the concrete pads. My mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe a loose sign. Maybe a branch hitting metal. Maybe I was tired, overtired, hearing patterns where none existed. But deep down, beneath all the rational layers I'd built in my life, something older whispered a truth I didn't want to acknowledge. The knocking was intentional. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside before my fear convinced me not to. The cold slapped my face immediately. I swept the beam across the campground, empty pads, tilted posts, the office trailer standing silent. Then, just at the edge of the light, I saw her, a woman, or rather, the outline of a woman, thin, unmoving, standing beside the electric post where I'd parked. Her head slightly tilted, her hands hanging at her sides, not approaching, not retreating, just present. I blinked and she was gone. A hallucination, I told myself. Exhaustion. My brain filling the void with shapes. But the panic rising inside me didn't care about logic. My instincts screamed that I was not alone, that something here recognized me, or mistook me for someone else. I hurried back into the van, locked the door, and sat in the driver's seat with my hands trembling on the wheel. I didn't start the engine. Every survival instinct said to leave, but something held me in place. Curiosity, stubbornness, or maybe a deeper understanding I couldn't articulate. Leaving now wouldn't change what I'd already stepped into. The knocking didn't return. Instead, a different sound drifted through the stillness, a soft, breathy whisper. Not words exactly, but the cadence of someone trying to speak from far away. It came from the diner, or maybe the houses, or maybe from the ground itself. I forced myself to breathe, in through my nose, like out through my mouth, the way my dad taught me during panic attacks when I was a kid. The warmth of the van slowly returned, and the whispers faded until my ears rang with the absence of them. I stayed awake for hours, staring at the windshield as if something might appear in it, but nothing did. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me. Not sleep, more like drifting. And in that liminal space, when I was neither awake nor unconscious, I heard one last sound, a single knock, from inside the van. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat, my fingers frozen around the edges of the blanket I'd pulled over myself without realizing it. The knock had been soft, almost polite, but there was no mistaking where it came from. Not the walls, not the door, inside. Somewhere behind me, inside the cramped shell of the Volkswagen where no one should be. I sat up slowly, every muscle tight enough to snap. The van was dark, except for the thin spill of moonlight slipping through the cracked curtain. My eyes adjusted just enough to make out the familiar outlines. The cabinets, the small cooler, the tangled sleeping bag at my feet. Nothing was out of place, but something was different. The air felt wrong, humid in a way the desert night should never allow. I could smell that strange mixture again, burned sage and metal. Stronger now, as if it were coming from inches away instead of drifting through the campground. My heartbeat thudded so loudly, I almost convinced myself it might have been the source of the knock. Almost. I reached for my phone, turning on the flashlight feature slowly, like sudden movements might provoke whatever was sharing the space with me. The pale beam washed over the cabinets, the stove, the floor. Nothing. I angled the light toward the back of the van. That's when I saw the handprint. It was faint, smeared across the inside of the rear window. Long fingers unusually narrow, like whoever left it had pressed lightly, not trying to escape or force their way in, just announcing they'd been there. Or still were. My lungs tightened. The rational part of my brain sprinted for explanations. Condensation. Oil from my own hand. Old smudges illuminated by the angle of the light. But the print was fresh, too distinct, too deliberate, and my hands didn't look anything like that. I swallowed hard and forced myself to inspect the van, inch by inch. I opened the cabinets, the tiny closet, even the space under the sink where I stored tools. Empty. The only sound was the faint rattle of the roof vent in the breeze. I was alone, at least physically. I didn't sleep again. Instead, I sat upright with my back against the driver's seat, every nerve buzzing. When dawn finally broke, pale pink light spilling across the campground, it felt like waking up from a nightmare I hadn't actually escaped. But daylight has a way of shrinking your fears, even if it doesn't erase them. I needed to understand what had happened, or at least convince myself it wasn't as frightening as it seemed. So I stepped out of the van, walked a slow perimeter around it, and looked for footprints in the dirt. There were plenty of old ones, baked into the ground by years of sun. Some from boots, some from shoes, some deep enough to belong to RV travelers who'd stood outside grilling dinner, but nothing fresh. Nothing that matched the delicate fingers on the glass. I turned toward the main road, half expecting to see someone watching me from the diner or the gas station. But Marlene was as empty as the moment I'd arrived. Too empty. I debated leaving right then. I even unlocked the driver's door and sat behind the wheel, staring at the dusty street leading back toward the highway. But the moment I touched the gear shift, a strange clarity settled over me. If I drove away now, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what I had run from. And I knew myself too well. Wondering is its own kind of haunting. So instead of fleeing, I locked the van again and headed toward town. I started with the diner. The door resisted more than it should have, like it had swollen from weathering too many monsoon seasons. When it finally gave, a gust of stale, cold air brushed past me. The interior looked like a snapshot of a life abruptly abandoned. Menus still on the tables, napkin dispensers full, a half-washed plate sitting near the sink. The kind of scene that made my stomach knot. I walked behind the counter and found a stack of newspapers beneath the register. The top one was from 1998. A headline about a local mine shutting down, another about missing travelers, 2 in 1 month. Both last seen driving through Marlene. I folded the paper back carefully and forced myself to keep looking. I don't know what I expected. Clues, signs, a reason people disappeared. But sometimes when you're afraid, the act of searching feels like taking control, even if you don't know what you're searching for. The only thing that stood out was a small Polaroid taped to the wall behind the counter. 4 people stood in front of an RV, smiling like they had all the time in the world. Someone had written a date on it in black marker. July 2nd. No year. But beneath the date, in smaller, shakier handwriting, someone had added a second note, last seen by the pump. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. I left the diner quickly, the floorboards creaking under my feet as if they disapproved of my curiosity. Outside, the wind kicked up, carrying dust in small swirling patterns that made it hard to tell if something was moving at the edges of my vision. I walked toward the gas station next. The single pump stood crooked, its hose resting on the ground like a discarded limb. I approached cautiously, scanning for fresh footprints, tire tracks, anything. Nothing but the remnants of a place long forgotten, until I heard it, a voice, faint, female. It drifted from somewhere behind the building, a whisper carried by the wind, too soft to make out words but unmistakably directed at me. Not calling, not pleading, warning. My pulse hammered as I moved slowly around the side of the building. The air grew colder with each step. I felt it first on the back of my neck, a creeping, icy touch, like someone exhaling against my skin. I turned. Nothing. Just empty desert stretching toward the horizon. But the cold didn't fade. It settled around me like invisible hands, gripping lightly, almost guiding me back toward the campground. I stumbled backward, breath quickening, heart pounding so loudly it almost drowned out the whispering that rose again from nowhere and everywhere. A single word this time. Stop. I'm not proud of what happened next. My instincts split in two, one half telling me to run, the other urging me to stand my ground. I froze in that indecision until a sudden gust of wind slammed against me, strong enough to lift the dust at my feet and scatter it across the cracked pavement. That broke my paralysis. I turned and hurried back toward the Volkswagen, my footsteps echoing far too loudly in the silence. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if something was following. When I reached the van, the sun had climbed higher, warming the metal and washing the campground in honey-colored light. Everything looked ordinary again, but the handprint on the inside of the glass was still there. And now, next to it, was a second one, smaller, as if someone else had joined the first in the night. My throat tightened. Fear prickled the back of my eyes. I wanted to believe I was imagining things, that fatigue and anxiety had turned dust smudges into ghostly messages. But I couldn't deny the truth anymore. Something here was aware of me, and it didn't want me exploring. I climbed into the van, shut the door, and sat for several minutes with my forehead pressed to the steering wheel. The tension I'd been carrying since the previous night finally broke into something sharper, more urgent. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This wasn't about closure. This was survival. I reached for the ignition. The key turned. The engine didn't start. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing but a low click and a sputter, like the van was gasping for breath. My heart sank. The Volkswagen had never failed me before, not once. I kept it maintained like a sacred duty. It always started. Always. But not here. Not in Marlene. As I sat there trying to steady my breathing, something moved behind me. Not inside the van this time, but outside. A slow, dragging sound across the gravel. Close. Too close. I lifted my head, and that's when I saw the figure standing in the reflection of the windshield. Not behind me, beside the van, watching. For a second, I couldn't tell if the figure was real or just another trick of the morning light bending through the dust. But as the reflection held steady, my stomach dropped in a way that left no room for doubt. Someone or something was standing just outside the passenger door. Tall, thin, shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying weight that didn't belong to them. The shape was wrong in small, unsettling ways I couldn't fully articulate. The arms too long, the posture too still. The head tilted forward just enough to suggest listening. I didn't look directly at them. Something in me refused. Instead, I kept my eyes glued to the windshield, watching their blurred outline watching me. It felt like staring into a memory that didn't belong to me, like I'd stepped into someone else's nightmare and hadn't found the exit. My breath fogged the glass. That scent, burned sage and metal, flooded the van again, thicker than before. It seeped into every corner of the cabin like smoke from a fire I couldn't see. My chest tightened, not from panic this time, but from something heavier. Recognition. As if this presence wasn't trying to harm me, but wasn't trying to help either. It simply was, and had been for a very long time. The figure didn't move, didn't whisper, didn't knock, just lingered. Finally, I forced myself to turn my head, inch by inch, toward the passenger window. There was nothing there. The space was empty, but the smell was still strong, the air still colder, and on the glass, where the figure had stood mere moments before, a faint outline of breath clung to the surface, an oval of fog that hadn't come from me. Slowly it faded until only the memory of it remained. I needed to get out of this town. That was the only coherent thought left. The Volkswagen still wouldn't start, but I wasn't about to sit still while whatever haunted Marlene tightened its hold. I grabbed my water bottle, a small pack, and my emergency radio, then stepped outside. The instant my feet hit the gravel, the warmth of the sun wrapped around me like a lifeline. Strangely, the campground looked calmer in full daylight, almost benign. The trailers long gone, the electric posts leaning like old friends, the office door tapping its soft rhythm. For a brief, foolish moment, I almost convinced myself none of it had happened. But then I heard it. Footsteps. Not soft, not subtle, firm enough to leave no ambiguity. They came from behind one of the cabins across the street. Heavy, human, and not in a hurry. Whoever it was walked with an eerie, deliberate rhythm as if matching their pace to the beat of my heart. I should have run, but fear doesn't always make you flee. Sometimes it roots you to the ground, forcing you to take in every detail like your senses are trying to write a will. I backed toward the van, eyes locked on the cabin. The footsteps drew closer, reached the corner, then stopped. Silence. Then the whisper returned. Closer now. Clearer. Not a warning. A question. Leave? The word floated like smoke, curling into my ears and sinking deep. Leave. But not the way a parent warns a child from a busy street. More like someone asking a stranger to walk away from an open grave. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just turned and started walking toward the highway. The road stretched barren, shimmering with heat ahead, nothing but sagebrush and dust on either side. A few miles back, the way I'd come, I knew my phone would catch a bar of signal again. It wasn't ideal, but it was my only option. As I walked, I kept glancing back. The town shrank behind me, the diner's metal roof blinking with sunlight, the gas pump leaning like it wanted to collapse. Nothing moved. No shadows, no figures, no whispers. For the first time since arriving, Marlene felt genuinely empty, but emptiness can be its own threat. Half a mile out, the air shifted again. The sun dimmed. Not behind clouds, there were none, but as if someone were turning down a dimmer switch on the world itself. My skin prickled. The familiar cold slid across my shoulders like a hand guiding me, pushing lightly, nudging me not to look back. So I did. The figure was standing in the middle of the road by the town limits sign, closer than before, clearer. My throat tightened as I tried to make sense of their shape. They weren't transparent, not like something a camera would miss, but they weren't solid either, almost like their outline was stitched from heat waves, wavering and pulsing, as if their existence depended on the air holding them together. They raised an arm, slowly, not in threat, more like a gesture of farewell or warning, the kind you give someone when it's too late to save them but too cruel to let them walk away unacknowledged. A strange, unexpected sadness washed through me, heavy, sinking. Like whatever they were had once been human, had once lived in Marlene, had once knocked on a door waiting to be let out of a life they didn't choose. Maybe the people on that Polaroid. Maybe one of the travelers in the newspaper. Maybe someone who stood in my exact footprints years ago, thinking they could fix or understand something they should have walked away from. I turned and kept walking. My steps quickened as the warmth returned, as my shadow grew sharp again, as the scent of burned sage finally faded from the air. When the bars came back on my phone, I called for roadside assistance, but the connection dropped 3 times before I found a stable spot. A tow truck came 3 hours later. The man who stepped out was named Colin, a middle-aged guy with kind eyes and a sunburned neck. He didn't ask why I looked shaken. Most people who work the deep desert don't ask questions like that. When we got back to the van, the air felt normal again. Warm, still, unremarkable. Like the fear I'd felt in Marlene was a story I'd only heard in a dream. Colin looked under the hood, scratched his chin, and told me something I still can't fully explain. "Your starter's fine," he murmured. "Connections are clean, batteries strong, should start up just fine." "But it wouldn't," I said quietly. He nodded slowly, shutting the hood with a soft thud. "Sometimes," he said, "a place doesn't want you leaving until it's ready." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure how. When he turned the key, the Volkswagen started on the first try. We didn't speak as I followed him back toward the highway, the town disappearing behind me like a mirage. When we reached the crossroads where he had to turn north and I had to go south, he stepped out of his truck and motioned for me to roll down the window. "You don't have to tell me what you saw," he said, voice steady but gentle. "But listen to me. Not every town that empties out is dead. Some are just full of things you and I don't have the language for. If you pass a place that feels wrong, trust that. Don't wait for proof." I nodded. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "And if you ever see breath on the inside of your glass that isn't yours, you leave. No questions asked." I drove until the desert turned into mountains, until the mountains turned into forest, until the forest finally made room for cities again. But no matter how far I got, part of me stayed in Marlene, with the whispers, with the figures, with the quiet grief of a place that never truly let go of the people who wandered into it. I still camp in my Volkswagen. I still chase open roads and empty horizons. But I've learned the difference between solitude and silence, and the kind of silence that listens back. Sometimes, when the night is cold and the wind shifts just right, I think about that breath on the glass, the gentle knock in the dark, and the figure raising its arm behind me on the road. And I remind myself of the simplest lesson Marlene ever taught me. Not everything abandoned is empty, and not every whisper wants to be answered. The night the desert finally spoke to me, it didn't do it with words, it did it with breath. A slow, deliberate exhale that pushed through the thin canvas walls of my old Volkswagen camper and settled against the back of my neck like someone leaning in too close, reminding me I wasn't as alone as I thought. That moment changed everything I believed about the quiet places of the American Southwest, and I still think about it every time I strike a match beside a campfire. My name's Wesley Hart. I'm 46, born and raised in New Mexico, and I've been wandering deserts since before I could legally drive. I used to think the only thing worth fearing out here was dehydration or bad judgment, but now I know better. Now I know the desert keeps its own stories. Stories it doesn't tell unless it decides you're ready, or maybe when it decides you won't make it out to tell anyone else. I'd been camping alone for years, but nothing I carried. My age, my experience, my stubborn belief in rational explanations prepared me for what I lived through that week. I was out near Muley Point, far from anything resembling civilization. The ground was a mosaic of sandstone plates, pale and fractured, like the desert had once been a giant bone crushed under something unimaginably heavy. It was the kind of place where the wind makes you feel watched. Not by animals, not by people, by the land itself. That dry, ancient hush settles on you like a warning. But I ignored it. I always did. Experience breeds arrogance, and arrogance breeds mistakes. The first strange thing was the smell. Deserts don't normally smell like much at night. A little sage, a little dust, sometimes a trace of creosote after rain. But that night, just after sunset, a cold, metallic scent drifted in with the breeze. Not blood, exactly, but close enough to make every hair on my arms lift. I tried to laugh it off at first. Told myself it was iron in the rocks or some animal carcass carried by the wind. But deep down, something in me recognized it. A memory I didn't want resurfacing. When I was 17, my brother vanished during a hiking trip in Organ Pipe. They found his pack, his boots, even the water bottle with his name scratched into the metal. But not him. Never him. And the last time I saw his face, I swear that same metallic scent clung to the air around us, as if the desert had already chosen which one of us it wanted. That old fear flickered in me as the scent thickened. I tossed more wood onto the fire, trying to conjure heat and light enough to push back whatever was creeping into my subconscious. My Volkswagen sat behind me, engine warm from the long drive, paint faded by decades of sun. I loved that camper. It made me feel like I still belonged anywhere I parked it. But that night, even the van felt smaller, more fragile. A shelter only in name. The breeze shifted, the smell vanished, but something else took its place. The sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, dragging. At first, I told myself it was just the fire popping or maybe a deer picking its way across the shale, but the steps grew clearer, deliberate, moving with an unhurried, almost curious pace like whatever it was had been watching my camp for a long time and finally decided to come closer. I gripped the edge of my folding chair. My breath thinned. I leaned toward the dark. That was when the wind died completely. Total stillness. No insects, no shifting sand, no distant coyotes. Just silence. So absolute it felt like a presence. I didn't call out. I didn't move. I didn't want to acknowledge it. For a moment, denial wrapped around me like a blanket, warm, blinding, comforting. It must be an animal. It must be a trick of acoustics. It must be one of 1,000 ordinary explanations that don't end with something standing 5 feet behind me, waiting for me to turn around. But then the fire dimmed, just slightly, like a shadow passed in front of it. My hands trembled. I reached for the flashlight clipped to my belt, but I didn't dare switch it on. Every instinct screamed that shining a light would be like making eye contact with something I wasn't ready to see. The footsteps stopped. That was worse. I could feel a pressure behind me, not a touch, not the displacement of air, but the unmistakable sensation of being observed by something with intention, something thinking, something choosing. I forced myself to breathe, forced myself to think. If it was a person, they'd speak. If it was an animal, it would make noise. This was neither. Finally, I gathered enough courage to turn my head a fraction, just enough to widen my peripheral vision. Nothing. Just the fire, my van, the darkness swallowing everything beyond its glow. I released a shaky breath. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Not a voice. Not language. Just breath. A slow, drawn-out exhale, like someone trying to fog up glass. But it brushed against the back of my left ear, too close to be imagination, too real to dismiss. I shot up out of my chair, nearly kicking it into the fire. My heart hammered so hard it rattled my ribs. I spun around, scanning the darkness. Still nothing. But the smell returned. This time stronger. It poured into the camp like it was following me specifically, wrapping around my chest in a cold, suffocating mist. It dredged up memories I'd buried, my brother's last smile, the empty space where he should have been found, the search teams whispering theories they didn't dare say aloud. My throat tightened with dread. The desert hadn't just reminded me of him. It felt like it was asking me to remember something I'd forgotten. Maybe something I didn't want to remember. The fire cracked violently, snapping me out of the spiral. Flames stretched upward like something had passed through them. Something tall, something fast. The temperature dropped. Not drastically, not frostbite cold, but enough to feel like a shift in the natural order. I retreated toward the Volkswagen. Not panicked yet, but close. My rational mind clung to excuses. Temperature inversions, strange desert acoustics, maybe even the suggestion of old trauma mixing with solitude. I told myself all this as I fumbled with the van door. Then something scraped across the roof. A single, deliberate drag of weight across metal. That sound is one I'll never forget. It was slow, like fingers. No, claws, tracing the whole length of the camper, savoring each inch. I dropped to a crouch instinctively, like prey trying to become invisible. My breath locked in my throat. Another scrape, then a soft tap, right above where my head had been moments earlier. Panic punched through me, raw and electric. This wasn't trauma. This wasn't wind. This wasn't memory. Something was on my van. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the roofline, though I couldn't see a thing. My fire guttered, struggling against the sudden weight pressing into the camp, as if the night itself leaned closer to watch. Then the tapping stopped. Silence. Something heavy hit the ground behind the van. I froze. Every muscle locked. Whatever had been on the roof had jumped off, and it landed without the thud of hooves or paws. It landed almost silently, like it absorbed its own weight. That was when I finally reached for the flashlight. That was when I finally realized I might not get another chance. And that was when I made the biggest mistake of the entire night. The second my thumb clicked the flashlight on, the beam didn't cut through the darkness the way it should have. It stopped barely 10 feet out, smothered by the night like the desert refused to let the light pass. It was the kind of dark that felt thick, like something you could breathe in, something that pushed back. My heart hammered so loudly I swore whatever was out there could hear it. I swept the light across the ground, the van, the fire pit. Nothing. No footprints in the sand, no shifting shape. no gleaming eyes reflecting back at me. But I felt it, watching, waiting. I took a step forward, slow and deliberate, refusing to let panic turn me reckless. Fear's a strange thing. Sometimes it makes you freeze, sometimes it makes you run, but every once in a while it forces you into a twisted sense of calm. The kind born not from bravery, but from the realization that you're already past the point where panic can help. That's where I was, balanced on the thin line between instinct and terror, flashlight shaking in my grip. Then the wind stirred. Only it wasn't wind. It was breath. A cold exhale brushed the back of my right hand, soft, gentle, intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. I jerked the flashlight toward it, but the beam hit only dust swirling low to the ground. The rational part of me screamed to get inside the Volkswagen, lock the doors, and ride out the night. But something deeper whispered a warning. If I turned my back, if I tried to hide, whatever this was wouldn't stop. It would follow. It would step inside with me. I kept the light forward, scanning. Nothing. But then the smell, God, that smell, rolled in again, thicker than before. Metallic, like heated iron dipped in cold water. It coated the back of my throat until I gagged. Instinct pulled me back a few steps. The Volkswagen loomed behind me, a faint shape in the failing glow of the fire. That was when I noticed something wrong with the fire. The flames weren't burning upward. They were bending, leaning, toward the van, toward me. I stared at them, breath stuttering. Flames don't do that. Not without wind. And there was no wind. Not a whisper. The desert had gone eerily still again, and it felt personal now, as if the world had narrowed its attention to a single point. My point. I took another step backward. That was when something moved at the edge of the dying firelight. A silhouette. Wrong in shape. Wrong in height. Wrong in everything that makes a thing belong in this world. It wasn't human. But it wasn't an animal either. It was tall, taller than the van. Its shoulders were narrow, too narrow, tapering into a long, sloping shadow. Its head tilted as though curious, but the angle was impossible, unnatural, like its neck didn't understand the limits of bone. I froze, blood turning to ice. The shadow didn't approach, didn't retreat. It just watched. I felt its attention like pressure across my skin, a cold weight that pinned me in place. It leaned forward slightly, and the smell intensified until I almost retched. My flashlight flickered, not because the batteries were weak, because something interfered with it. The silhouette seemed to pulse. 2 steps closer, then gone, then there again in the same place, like time skipped around it. I blinked, heart thundering, but the world didn't make sense anymore. The desert felt warped, stretched, pulled into a shape not meant for humans to witness. I forced my voice to work. Who's there? It came out dry, cracked, barely louder than a whisper. The silhouette straightened, a long, slow motion, almost deliberate. And for the first time, I heard it make a sound, a scraping inhale, like air being pulled through a throat not designed for breath. My knees nearly buckled, then soft footsteps, behind me. I spun, flashlight whipping through the dark. But nothing. Absolutely nothing. Except the van door was open. I hadn't opened it. I knew I hadn't. The interior dome light glowed faintly, casting a sickly yellow halo onto the sand. My breath caught in my lungs. The inside of that van had always been my refuge, the one place I trusted completely. Seeing it open, violated, felt like a punch to the gut. Something had been inside. Something might still be. I took a step backward toward the van, torn between running and refusing to surrender the only shelter I had. The silhouette near the fire hadn't moved again, but I could feel the space between us tightening, as if it were waiting to see what choice I'd make. I edged closer to the van, every movement slow, terrified of provoking whatever lingered in the dark. My flashlight dimmed further, the beam shrinking, suffocating under the unnatural weight of the night. Halfway to the van, the metallic smell surged so violently I gagged and doubled over, and that was when I heard it. A soft thump. Inside the van. My head snapped up. Another thump, louder. Something was moving inside. I forced myself to the door, hand trembling as I reached toward the handle. My breath came in sharp, uneven bursts. Part of me screamed to run. Another part, the part that had lived in the desert long enough to know running often makes things worse, held me there. I yanked the sliding door fully open. The dome light flickered, then went dark. Everything inside was black except for the faint beam of my dying flashlight. I swept it across the interior, sleeping bag, cooler, water jug, hiking pack, all where I'd left them. But there, in the far corner, was a shape that hadn't been there before. Small, curled, almost childlike. My breath hitched. The shape didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't acknowledge me in any way. But I knew it wasn't right. Nothing about its outline made sense. I stepped closer. The shape twitched, just once, just enough to confirm it was alive. My stomach dropped. My hand shot to the door, ready to slam it shut, but something inside me stalled, a pull. Not curiosity, something weaker, older. Compulsion, maybe, or dread recognizing its source. The shape slowly uncurled. A limb emerged, thin, angular. Too many joints bending in too many directions. Another limb followed. Then its head raised. And the exact moment the light touched it, the flashlight went out completely. Darkness swallowed the van. I stumbled backward, colliding with the doorframe. My pulse roared in my ears. I scrambled away from the van on instinct just as something inside let out a long, shaking exhale. Not angry, not aggressive, just aware. Aware of me. I dropped the flashlight, spun toward the fire, and froze again. The tall silhouette was gone. The fire burned strangely steady now, its flames unnaturally still, as if frozen in place. The air grew colder. A desert night should never feel like that. It pressed into my skin like I was underwater, my breath shallow and tight. My options narrowed to a single, terrible choice. Stay near the van with the thing inside, or turn my back on the emptiness where the silhouette had been. Neither felt survivable. Then in the distance something moved. Not near camp, not near me. Out on the far edge of the desert floor. A faint glow. Soft. Unsteady. Campfire light. Someone else. Someone camping. Someone alive. Or something pretending to be. My chest constricted with conflicting instincts. Fear of the unknown versus the primal need not to die alone out here. I swallowed hard, eyes never leaving the faint glow on the horizon, and despite everything, despite the smell, despite the silhouette, despite the thing inside my van, I started walking toward the distant fire. Because what I didn't realize yet was that the desert wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. I told myself I was walking toward help, but the truth is I was walking away from the van because I couldn't bear to take another breath with whatever was breathing inside it. Each step felt like a betrayal of the place that had carried me across 1,000 miles of open country. But the desert doesn't care about loyalty. It teaches you quickly that survival requires choosing the fear you think you can outrun. The night swallowed me as I left the fire behind. Its glow shrank, then vanished completely behind the lip of the sandstone rise. I kept my eyes fixed on the distant flicker of the other campfire ahead, small, shaky, almost nervous in the darkness. My boots crunched over gravel and small bones bleached by years of sun. A coyote's skull rolled under my toe, hollow eye sockets staring back up at me in the thin moonlight. I kicked it aside without meaning to, and it skittered across the ground with a hollow clatter that echoed far too long. The metallic smell followed me. Not strong now, just a faint trace, like the night didn't want me to forget who it belonged to. I walked harder. My breathing settled into something shallow, half-controlled, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The desert was too quiet again. The kind of quiet that makes your ears work overtime, like they're reaching out for the sound they know should be there. It felt like the land was holding its breath. A sudden gust pushed against my back. Not cold this time, warm, like air exhaled from a deep cavern. It nudged me forward, almost urging. I stumbled, caught myself, and forced my legs to keep moving. As I got closer, the campfire's glow sharpened, revealing tiny movements, shadows of a person sitting beside it. Relief hit me so fast and so hard my knees nearly buckled. I wasn't alone out here. Someone else had to have seen something, heard something, felt something. Maybe there was a rational explanation for all of it. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. The desert does that. Wide horizons warp your sense of scale, and the darkness can make you hear your own heartbeat as something external. I clung to that hope like it was my last remaining anchor to sanity. "Hey!" I called out, voice cracking. "Hey, I'm coming in!" No answer, just the pop of burning wood. I slowed, unease sliding back in under my ribs. The fire was bright, steady now, burning clean. Too clean, like someone had just fed it fresh wood. I approached with cautious optimism, trying to steady my breath. A figure sat on a folding stool, back facing me, shoulders hunched, arms draped loosely over knees. I felt a rush of gratitude so strong it almost hurt. "Sorry to barge in," I said, stepping closer. "My camp, something happened. I didn't know where else to go." Still nothing, not a twitch, not a shift. The fire crackled in a hollow, unnatural rhythm. The warmth didn't reach me, even from a few feet away. I swallowed hard. "Sir, are you all right?" The figure lifted its head slowly, stiffly, like a puppet being tugged upright by invisible strings. My skin turned to ice. The person's silhouette was too still, too rigid. I took 2 hesitant steps forward. The man's head tilted just slightly to the side, acknowledging me without turning around. The movement was small but deliberate. Relief and terror collided in my chest. "Sir," I tried again, voice thinner now. "I'm sorry to bother you, but..." He raised a hand, a single gentle gesture, palm facing me. Not a warning, an invitation. I froze. My instincts screamed, clawing at my insides. Every part of me that had lived in the desert knew. People don't sit perfectly still like that. People don't burn a fire with no supplies around. People don't wait in silence like they heard you coming long before you arrived. I forced myself one step closer. "Do you have a radio? Anything I can use to call out?" I asked. The fingers of the raised hand curled inward, once, twice, beckoning. "Come closer." My breath pulled short. "I can't see your face. Can you turn around?" The hand stilled. Then, the fire bent sideways. Not the flames, the light. It twisted, pulled toward him like gravity had shifted. My mouth went dry. The figure finally stood, but not like a man stands, not like someone shifting their weight from foot to foot. It rose in one continuous, unnatural motion, no pauses, no settling of bones, as if it were remembering how to imitate the act of standing. He, or it, didn't turn. He just straightened, facing the empty desert ahead, head cocked slightly in a posture too calm for the situation. Then I noticed something worse. There were no footprints around the stool. None. Not even one. My heartbeat faltered. I took a single step backward. He spoke. His voice was soft, paper thin, as if coming from beyond him or beneath him. "You shouldn't have left your camp." My stomach dropped so hard I nearly collapsed. I wasn't breathing. I wasn't thinking. I was simply existing inside raw, electric terror. "How?" I managed to whisper. "How do you know where I was?" He finally turned, slow. Too slow. Like the motion was being studied as it happened. When his face came into view, the fire dimmed, shadows clinging to his features as if they didn't want to reveal them fully. His eyes, if you could call them that, didn't reflect the firelight. Not a single flicker. His skin looked dry, almost cracked, like desert clay left to bake in the sun. But the worst part was the expression. Not anger, not joy, not malice, just recognition. "I watched you," he said quietly. My throat constricted. "From where?" My voice barely escaped. He lifted one finger and pointed behind me, toward the darkness, toward my campsite, toward the van. I was already there. The wind slammed into me. Goosebumps flared across my arms. My mouth fell open, but no sound came out. The metallic scent hit me so powerfully I gagged. "You brought it with you," he whispered. My legs moved without permission, stumbling backward. "What are you talking about? What is it?" He tilted his head the opposite direction, a mirror of the tilt I'd seen earlier from the silhouette near my fire. "This place remembers," he said. "It doesn't forgive. It keeps what it takes." His voice cracked on the last word, like speaking it hurt something inside him. My breath trembled. Keeps what?" He stepped closer. I stepped back. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "You never should have come back." "I've never been here before," I insisted, teeth chattering. He shook his head. Slow, sad. "You came once, long ago." A pause. "With him." My body went weightless. He was talking about my brother. Before I could choke out a response, a sound rose behind us, a distant scrape, a dragging. The same sound I'd heard against the roof of my van. My heart stopped. My eyes darted across the dark horizon. The man, or the thing wearing a man's shape, lifted its head toward the sound. "It followed your memory," he whispered. "It followed your grief." He stepped past the fire, moving away from me, and stared out into the endless dark. And in that moment, something changed. He went utterly still, too still, like a statue forgetting it was supposed to breathe. Then he spoke, barely audible. "It's here." The fire blew out. Darkness slammed down on us like a falling curtain, and from the desert floor behind me, something began to rise. I didn't turn around. Not at first. Some primal part of me knew that if I faced whatever was rising from the desert floor, my mind might not survive what my eyes would see. The sand behind me shifted with a heavy, deliberate rhythm, grain sliding over grain in slow cascades, like something tall was pulling itself out of a shallow grave. Every muscle in my body locked. I stood frozen, breath trapped in my chest, feeling each heartbeat pulse like a warning flare against my ribs. The man, if he was still a man, didn't look back either. He stared forward as though the darkness ahead of him was speaking to him in a language I couldn't hear. His voice, when it finally came, was little more than a breath. "Don't move. Don't give it shape." I didn't know what he meant, but I obeyed. The rising sound grew louder, dry, gritty, scraping, something brushing against stone, something dragging weight across the desert crust. I tried to inhale quietly, but my lungs felt locked in place. The air was heavy, metallic, and cold, too cold, like the night itself was thinning out, pulling heat away from anything that still belonged to the living. A single thought cut through my terror. It was the same presence I felt behind my van, the same invisible watcher, the same breath against my skin, and now it had followed me. The man stepped 1 foot back, just slightly, barely shifting the sand. But that movement alone felt urgent, protective. "Don't let it know you're afraid," he whispered. My voice cracked. Too late. He turned his head half an inch toward me, jaw tight. "When you fear it, you remember it. When you remember it, you feed it." My stomach twisted. Panic clawed at my throat. "What does it want?" He exhaled shakily. "It wants what was lost to it." My brother. He didn't say it, but the desert did. The shape behind me grew taller, its shadow stretching forward across the sand as the ground vibrated softly like a heartbeat pulsing through stone. I still hadn't turned. I couldn't, but I felt it rising higher, felt the weight of it pressing against my spine like a physical force. A faint, wet exhale brushed the back of my neck. My knees almost buckled. The man's voice snapped in a sharp hiss. "Stay still." I froze again, held in place by equal parts terror and sheer animal instinct. The thing behind me inhaled a long, rattling sound like wind being sucked through a hollow trunk. Then it spoke, not in words, not in language, in breath, a slow, deliberate exhale shifting in pitch and shape until it formed the outline of a syllable, a sound I didn't want to understand. But I did. It whispered my name, not perfectly, not humanly, like something trying to force human sound through a throat that wasn't meant to make it. "Wes, Lee." My bones felt like they turned to dust. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape, to claw myself away from this place until I forgot every inch of desert that had ever touched my life. The man's hand gripped my forearm, ice-cold, firm, grounding. "Don't turn around. It only becomes real when you face it." "I can't." My voice broke. "You must." His hand tightened. "Listen, it isn't here for your life." I swallowed painfully. "Then what?" He leaned closer, voice barely audible. "It's here for your memory of him." The air thinned. My head spun. My brother? The thing behind me shifted closer, sand crunching under unimaginable weight. I felt its presence reach forward, like its awareness was stretching across the space between us. The man nodded once. "You came back to the desert." That opened the door. "I didn't come back here," I whispered. "I've never camped on this stretch before." He shook his head slowly. "Memory doesn't follow land. Memory follows longing, and the desert remembers everyone who grieved on its soil." A tremor rippled through the sand behind me. My breath stuttered. I could feel it towering there, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I, I squeezed my eyes shut. Why me? Why now? His answer cut like broken stone, because you never let him go. Wind surged suddenly, fast, forceful, spiraling around me like a miniature vortex. Sand pelted my legs and arms. I threw up my hands to shield my face. The desert roared with a voice carried on thousands of grains, each one vibrating like a whispered warning. The man beside me dug his feet into the ground, leaning against the blast. Through the storm, he yelled, "Don't turn around!" But something inside me cracked. A memory. A voice. My brother's laugh, high, bright, echoing across a canyon when we were kids. A moment so vivid I felt it bloom in my chest like a wound reopening. The shape behind me inhaled sharply, reacting. It felt my memory. It tasted it. The wind shifted direction, pulling harder now toward the place where I stood, dragging at my clothes, tearing at my hair, as if the desert wanted to pull something out of me through sheer force. The man grabbed my shoulder. "Wesley, listen to me. It doesn't want you. It wants the piece of you never stopped giving away." The storm crescendos. My hair whipped into my eyes. Sand bit into my skin. "What piece?" I choked out. He looked at me with an expression that wasn't human grief, but something deeper. Something ancient. Your regret. The words struck like lightning. Regret. That I pushed my brother to hike farther than he wanted. That he followed me because he trusted me. That the last thing I said to him, the last thing, was a joke about him slowing me down. The desert inhaled again, deeper than before. My ears popped. The pressure became unbearable. Something inside the storm whispered his name. Not mine now. His. I broke. I turned around. The world collapsed into a shape I cannot fully describe. It towered above me, limbs long and bent, joints too many, posture slouched like it had been standing broken for centuries. Its head was elongated, tilted in that same impossible angle I'd seen earlier, as if studying me with a curiosity that bordered on hunger. Its skin, or the suggestion of skin, looked like stretched desert clay, cracked and flaking, with veins of glowing ember beneath. But the eyes, God, the eyes. They were hollow impressions in its skull, not sockets, just voids where darkness lived, darkness that moved, and behind that darkness, something familiar flickered. A flash of a smile, a shape of a face. My brother's outline, his memory, trapped inside it like an echo caught in stone. My legs gave out. I hit the sand hard. The creature leaned down, slow, deliberate, lowering its face toward mine. It opened its mouth, if you could call it a mouth, and a sound poured out. A sound that broke me in ways I didn't know a human mind could break. My brother's voice, crying, calling my name, begging. "Wes, don't leave me again," I screamed. The desert swallowed the sound whole. The man grabbed my arm again, yanking me backward with startling strength. "Don't listen. That isn't him. It's what's left behind." I couldn't look away. I couldn't stop seeing my brother's shape pulsing inside its hollow form. The creature reached for me, a long, cracked finger stretching down. My name exhaled from its twisted throat, stitched together from memory and mimicry. "Wes Lee," the man shouted, gripping me harder. "Run!" But the creature touched my forehead and the world turned white. White. Blinding, absolute white. Like the world had been erased and rewritten as pure light, but with no warmth, just a sharp, unbearable emptiness that hollowed out my senses. I thought I'd gone unconscious or died or slipped into some memory loop the desert kept tucked beneath its sand. But then the whiteness thinned, stretched, and pulled itself apart like fabric tearing slowly. And beneath it, a whisper. "Wes, wait up." My brother's voice, young, alive, calling to me like he used to on every hike, every canyon scramble, every reckless adventure I dragged him on. My knees buckled as the white changed shape, blooming into color, into form, into the impossible. I was standing on the ridge trail we hiked the day before he disappeared. Only it wasn't then. It was now, and it wasn't memory. It felt real. The sky above was a washed-out blue. The sun hung low, casting orange and gold across the sandstone walls. My younger brother jogged ahead, pack bouncing, grin flashing back at me. Everything was too vivid, too sharp. The air smelled like creosote and warm rock. The world felt whole, felt innocent, but something was wrong, something silent beneath it, a pressure, a watching. I tried to call his name, but no sound came out. My throat moved, but the world refused my voice. He waved me forward. "Come on, man, you're slow today." The words hit me like a punch. I hadn't heard his voice in 29 years. Not like this, not with that lightness in it. Tears blurred my vision. My heart crumpled inside me. I stumbled forward, desperate to reach him. I knew, deep in the part of myself that hadn't healed, that this wasn't real, that something else was shaping this moment. But I couldn't stop. I didn't want to. I followed him along the narrow ridge, my boots kicking up familiar dust. It felt like reliving the best day of my life, knowing it would end as the worst. Then the trail ahead flickered, just once, like a film reel stuttering, barely noticeable. If I weren't already on the edge of breaking. My brother didn't flicker. He stopped at the ridge drop, turning around with a smile, the same smile he had hours before he vanished. "Race you down the next slope?" he asked. A single tear slid down my cheek. This was the moment. The exact moment we argued. The moment I pushed him to hike farther. The moment regret carved itself into my bones. "Wes," he said softly, stepping toward me. "You okay?" My voice finally cracked through. "Don't go." He blinked, confused. "What? Please," I choked. "Don't go. Don't walk ahead. Stay. Stay with me. Stay where I can see you." He frowned, stepping closer, and for a split second, I actually believed the desert was giving me a second chance. But then his features twitched, a tiny, unnatural jerk, like a puppet string pulled too tight. His smile returned, only wrong this time, too wide, too still. "Why?" he whispered, his voice bent around the word, bent in a way the human throat doesn't allow. Behind him, the sky rippled, like heat waves, but darker, thicker. A shape pressed against the light, stretching it, warping the air behind his silhouette. My stomach dropped. It wasn't him. It was never him. The world flickered again, faster now, colors tearing, sounds twisting, the ridge trembling beneath my feet. My brother's body jerked once more. Then his head tilted at that same impossible angle the creature used in the desert. "You left," he said, not in accusation, in mimicry. I stumbled backward, breath tearing from my throat. No, that's not." "You left," he repeated. "You brought me here." The sky cracked open behind him. A vertical fissure of white light split the horizon, and from inside it spilled cold, deep, ancient cold that didn't belong to any world I knew. The crack widened, and the creature's elongated arm emerged first, fingers dragging against empty air, bending reality around them. "No," I whispered. "Please." The false version of my brother stepped aside, body folding like paper, abandoning its form as the creature pulled itself through the tier. The desert ridgeline warped beneath its weight. The sandstone split, fracturing in jagged lines that radiated from its feet. The thing straightened, hollow eyes appraising me. It exhaled, and the ridge dissolved. I fell. The white light swallowed everything again, but this time it wasn't empty. It pulsed, it throbbed. Each beat matched the pounding of my heart. I clawed at the void, desperate for something solid, terrified of landing somewhere worse. Then the whiteness flashed, and I slammed onto hard desert ground. Night, cold, real. My lungs seized as air rushed back in. I was back in the desert, back in the present, back under a dead sky full of stars that seemed too distant to care. The man knelt beside me, gripping my jacket. "Can you hear me? Wesley, answer me." I coughed, choking on sand, tears streaming down my face. It showed me him. The man's face twisted with something like pain. That's how it survives. It feeds on memory, on longing, on the pieces of us we never let heal. I pushed myself up on trembling arms. "Why me? Why us?" He looked out into the dark desert, scanning, body tense. "Because you're not the only one it took from." The wind rose again, soft, building, swirling around us like recognition. I forced myself to ask the question I dreaded. "Who did you lose?" His jaw clenched. "My daughter." Silence fell between us, heavy, human, cut by grief older than anything the creature could manipulate. "I came here 5 years ago," he said, voice raw. "She disappeared in this valley. Search teams found her jacket, her shoes, not her." My chest tightened. "You've been here ever since?" "No." His eyes glazed. "Haunted. I came back to stop it. But you You woke it again. Guilt flooded me. I didn't know. You felt the pull, he said. You came anyway. I looked down, hands shaking uncontrollably. I didn't think. That's how it works, he whispered. It calls to us through what we refuse to release. A low rumble broke across the desert floor. The man stiffened. Not thunder, not wind, a dragging sound. Approaching. Steady. The creature. The man grabbed my wrist. Wesley, listen to me. It's stronger tonight. Too strong. We can't fight it. The dragging grew louder, scraping against rock. We run, he said. Now. I got to my feet, legs nearly giving out. The distant horizon pulsed with movement, shadows sliding across sand, bending light in warped waves. Which direction? I gasped. He pointed toward the far ridge, a silhouette barely visible. There's a dry wash, a cave. We can hide just long enough to survive the night. The dragging stopped. Silence swallowed everything. Then, a sound rose from the desert floor. Not breath, not wind. A voice, but not my brother's, not the man's. A new one, a woman's voice. Soft, breaking. Calling, Daddy. The man shattered, his breath hitching, his eyes filling instantly, his body staggering as though stabbed. I grabbed his arm. Don't listen. It's not her. He began to shake violently. That's her voice. That's Wesley. That's her. No, I insisted, tightening my grip. It's what killed them both. The voice rose again, closer, crying now. Daddy, help me. The man crumpled to one knee. We have to go, I said. We have to. But the desert wind shifted, and the smell hit us. Metallic, cold, claiming. Behind us, something massive inhaled, and the night bent toward us. The night bent toward us like the whole desert had taken one long breath in our direction. I felt it before I heard it. The shift in pressure, the deep pull of air that sucked warmth out of my lungs. The man beside me, broken, shaking, torn open by the voice of his daughter, didn't move. His grief pinned him to the earth like a stake, and behind us, something impossibly large exhaled, the sound rolling through the air like a slow, heavy tide. I grabbed his sleeve. We have to move. Now. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the dark horizon, on the place where the voice had come from. His whole body teetered between agony and hope, and the desert knew it. It fed on it. It used it like bait. The voice came again, clearer, closer, cracking with a child's sob. Daddy, please. The man choked out a sound, half sob, half prayer. That's her. That's my Mia. She's calling for me. I shook him hard, desperation clawing at my throat. It's not her. That thing knows what you miss. It knows what I miss. That's how it pulls us apart. He tore his arm from my grip and staggered forward. I heard her, he said, voice trembling. I heard her. You don't understand. I do, I yelled. I just lived it. I saw my brother. I felt him, and it wasn't him. It was memory twisted into a weapon. He froze, breath hitching. His knees buckled. He sank into the sand, and behind us, the dragging returned. Slow, heavy, relentless. Sand shifted in a long, scraping arc as the creature pulled itself closer. My scalp crawled. My lungs tightened. Every instinct screamed to run until my legs gave out, until the desert swallowed me just to end the chase. But the man wouldn't move. His hands dug into his hair, his voice cracking. I can't leave her again. I can't. The dragging grew louder. I turned and saw its shape cresting the low ridge behind us. Even in the dark, the creature didn't blend into shadow. It warped it, bent it inward. Its limbs unfolded in long, crooked arcs like it was remembering how to assemble itself. Each movement produced a dry cracking sound, like baked clay splitting open. The hollow impressions where eyes should have been pulsed faintly. Not light. Memory, a glow shaped like stolen moments. A face inside the void I recognized and hated myself for recognizing. My brother. Still trapped. Still begging. I snapped my focus back to the man. Listen to me. We have to go. You can't help her. I can't help him, but we can get out of here alive. He looked up at me with shattered eyes. I don't deserve to. The creature inhaled again, deep and long, and the metallic smell burst through the air like something rotten being unearthed. I coughed, gagging. Whether you deserve it or not, your daughter would want you to survive. His breath caught. A single tear slid down his cheek. Then another voice. A child's whisper. Not crying now, just soft. Closer. Daddy, don't leave me here, he gasped, eyes going wide. his body folded forward as though stabbed with invisible hooks tugging him toward the sound. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no, don't listen." But it was too late. A small figure appeared at the base of the ridge, child-sized, arms limp at its side, head bowed. The man let out a guttural sob. "Mia." He pushed to his feet, stumbling toward her. I lunged after him, grabbing the back of his jacket. "Stop! Look at her! Really look!" He resisted, but his steps slowed, uncertainty cracking through the fog of grief. The figure twitched, sharp and unnatural, its head lifted, snapping upward like pulled by a string. The face was not a face, just shadow stretched thin over bone with two indents where eyes didn't belong. The man crumpled, horror overtaking hope. "No, no, that's not." He didn't finish. A scream tore through the night, not human, not even animal. A raw, distorted sound that vibrated through my teeth. The creature on the ridge leaned forward as though responding to the smaller figure. Their hollow eyes pulsed in the same rhythm. I pulled the man backward with everything I had. "We run. Now!" This time, finally, he moved. We sprinted across the desert, the ground shifting treacherously under our feet. My lungs burned. My legs felt carved from stone, but we ran. Sand flew in long arcs behind us. The dragging grew louder, faster. Its pursuit no longer slow, no longer curious. Now it hunted. The man pointed ahead, breathless. "The wash! There!" A wide channel cut through the desert floor, carved by centuries of flash floods. The sides were steep enough to hide in, maybe even lose the creature if we moved fast enough. But the ground trembled. A deep vibration rolled through the earth. The man yelled, "Jump!" We leapt down the bank just as the creature reached the ridge above us. Sand rained down in a pouring curtain. I hit the ground on my shoulder, pain exploding up my arm. The man tumbled beside me, groaning in agony. We scrambled to our feet, running along the wash's shadowed interior. Behind us, the creature dropped down, not gracefully, not like an animal. It simply fell, collapsing its long limbs inward, its body hitting the ground with a monstrous crack. Clay shattered and reformed. Sand rose in a choking cloud. We ran harder. The man gasped, "There's a cave, keep going." The wash narrowed. Walls rose higher, shadows deeper. My boots struck rock, sand, rock, sand. My breath tore in ragged bursts. Every few seconds I glanced over my shoulder, each time seeing its shape pulling itself forward, its arms dragging its massive weight in lurching, unnatural strides. Its speed was increasing. Its head jerked with each movement, like it was smelling the memories leaking from our skin. From our skin. The man shouted, "Left bend here!" We turned sharply into a narrow corridor of stone. At the far end, a dark slit in the canyon wall. A cave, small, tight, but deep enough to hide in. We sprinted toward it. The creature's roar tore across the desert, a guttural, hollow blast that shook dust from the canyon ceiling. It hit the canyon wall behind us, claws scraping violently over rock as it tried to wedge its enormous body into the narrow turn. "We're almost there," I yelled. We dove into the cave entrance. The man collapsed to the ground, coughing, chest heaving. I pulled him deeper, deeper into the tight passage until the walls squeezed close enough that even I had to turn sideways to keep moving. The creature slammed against the entrance, stone cracked, the ground vibrated, its arm forced through, long, jointed, desperate, fingers sweeping blindly through the dark. We pressed ourselves against the back wall, breath shallow, hearts punishing our ribs. The arm groped violently, claws scraping sparks from the rock. It stretched farther, joints cracking, elongating like it was reshaping its body just to reach us. The man whispered, "It won't fit. It can't fit." But I wasn't convinced, not when I saw its limbs stretching another 6 inches, not when I heard its voice. The false child's cry echoed down the narrow stone throat of the cave. "Daddy, don't leave." The man sobbed, barely holding together. "Mia, I'm sorry." I grabbed his face with both hands. "She's gone. That thing took her. But if you go to it, it'll take you too." He trembled violently, eyes full of unbearable grief. Outside, the creature inhaled, pulling air through the cave like it was trying to suck us out. Sand flew inward. Dust stung my eyes. The walls shook. "We have to move deeper," I yelled. "But there's no space." "Then we make space." I pushed him toward the back of the cave, feeling along the wall for any crack, any hollow, any point of weakness. The creature roared again, and its arm rammed deeper, fingers brushing the man's boot. He screamed. I yanked him back. The creature inhaled again, long, powerful, hungry, and as the cave trembled under its pull, a chunk of stone behind us shifted. A hidden fault, a break, a chance. "We can get through," I said, adrenaline surging. "Help me push!" We shoved our weight against the slab. It groaned, dust raining down. The creature's claws scraped closer, slicing the air inches from my ankle. The slab finally slid open, revealing darkness beyond. I looked at the man. He looked at me. We had no choice. We slipped into the unknown darkness, just as the creature's hand snapped down on the spot where our bodies had been a heartbeat earlier. The stone closed behind us with a grinding thud, sealing the narrow passage like the desert itself wanted to swallow our tracks. The moment it slid shut, the creature's claws slammed against the outer wall, scraping and screeching with a hunger that rattled through my bones. The man beside me, Mia's father, pressed his palms to the rock, trembling so hard I thought he might collapse. I grabbed his arm and pulled him away from the wall as dust shook loose overhead in thin, choking clouds. We were deep now, deeper than I'd ever been in any canyon. The air was colder, heavier, filled with a faint smell of minerals and something older, like wet stone mixed with dried blood. We had only the narrow shaft of moonlight filtering through cracks overhead to guide us. "We keep moving," I whispered. He nodded weakly, eyes glazed with grief and fear. His voice came out hoarse. "Does this cave even have an end?" "I don't know," I said quietly. "But that thing, whatever it is, can't reshape stone forever." "Are you sure?" "No." Honesty was all we had left. We moved carefully through the narrowing passage, each step causing tiny pebbles to skitter forward in the dark. Behind us, the creature raked the stone again, harder this time, its frustration echoing like thunder rolling through a tomb. The sound pulsed down the walls, vibrating through my chest. It wasn't trying to scare us. It was tracking us. We pushed farther into the cave until the walls widened into a chamber, a hollow in the earth shaped almost like a rib cage, stone arching above us like the curve of ancient bones. The man sucked in a breath, pointing his flashlight toward the far wall. At first, I thought the patterns were natural. Then I realized they weren't patterns. They were carvings. Dozens, no, hundreds, of silhouettes etched deep into the stone, some tall, some small, human shapes, animal shapes, and some shapes that didn't belong to anything I wanted to imagine. The man stepped forward, voice cracking. These are people." My heart pounded. "Look at their hands." He lifted the light. Each carved figure had hands pressed against the stone, fingers splayed wide, as if trying to push out or trying to claw in. The deeper I looked, the more carvings appeared. Layers on layers, entire generations of etched silhouettes trapped beneath one another, each face twisted into a silently screaming shape. The man whispered, "Wesley, these aren't carvings." He traced a trembling finger across the closest figure's cheek. The texture wasn't stone, it was smoother, cooler. Flesh turned to mineral. Memories fossilized in the cave wall. A cold chill crawled up my spine. "This is where it keeps them." "They're memories," the man said, voice hollow. "They're pieces." A ragged exhale drifted through the chamber. "Not ours." The creature had found the gap. It had found its way inside. A low rumble rolled across the walls like a living heartbeat. Dust fell from the ceiling in soft showers. The man's flashlight flickered. A pressure filled the room, thick, suffocating, almost electric, like air held underwater too long. I swallowed hard. "Stay behind me." The man shook his head. "No, we run together." But we weren't running anywhere. Not this time. The cave behind us darkened. A shadow spilled inward like ink poured from a shattered jar. The creature emerged, its head scraping the ceiling, its limbs folding and unfolding like crooked wings. Long cracks ran across its clay-like skin, glowing faintly with that ember-orange light. Inside the hollow of its chest, something moved, fluttering like trapped breath. It inhaled. A cold wind burst into the chamber, ripping heat from my skin, tearing air from my lungs. The carved figures in the walls whispered, not words, just breath. memory shivering in stone. The creature stepped forward, one massive hand extended, fingers cracking, joints stretching far beyond human limits. It wasn't reaching for me, it was reaching for the man. He staggered back, hands raised defensively. No, no, please. The creature's hollow eyes pulsed. A voice, his daughter's voice, echoed softly behind me. Daddy. He turned, instinctively, painfully, toward the sound, and the creature lunged. I tackled him sideways, both of us crashing hard onto the stone floor just as the creature's hand slammed into the spot where he'd been standing. Stone cracked like bone. Shards flew across the chamber, slicing my arm open in a sharp, hot line. Pain shot up to my shoulder, but adrenaline swallowed it. The creature roared, a deep, hollow sound that vibrated through the marrow of the earth. The chamber shook violently. The man gasped. It's gonna bury us! Not if we move now! I yelled. We scrambled to our feet as the ceiling rumbled again. Cracks spider-webbed through the stone. Dust filled the air. The creature pulled back for another strike, its clay-like chest cracking open as a second voice bled through. My brothers. Wes, help me. Don't leave. I faltered, just a fraction of a second. My memories clawed at my ribs. His face brightened in the creature's chest. Warped, terrified, begging. The creature sensed it. It lunged again. But the man didn't freeze this time. He shoved me backward. Move! The creature's arms smashed into the ground inches from him, knocking loose a massive slab of rock above. The man dragged me to the side as the slab crashed down, blocking the creature's path, temporarily trapping the monstrous thing behind the avalanche of stone. We ran toward the only exit, a thin slit in the chamber wall, barely big enough to crawl through. The man slipped inside first, then reached back to pull me in. The rock behind us crumbled, the creature roaring in furious frustration as it clawed at the barrier. We crawled through tight darkness, stones scraping our backs, every inch forward fueled by pure survival. Finally, the passage widened, spilling us into open desert air. Moonlight, cold, real, brutal in the best way. We collapsed onto the sand, gasping, coughing, shaking uncontrollably. Behind us, the creature rammed against the cave wall again and again, muffled but still terrifying. The canyon shuddered with each impact. We need to go, I wheezed. It'll break through. The man struggled to his knees. There's a bluff up this way. We can climb it. It won't follow us into open terrain. We didn't argue. We climbed, hands bleeding, lungs burning, legs cramping. We hauled ourselves up the jagged slope. Each shove of our feet sent rocks tumbling into the darkness below. Halfway up, I dared to look back. The cave mouth glowed faintly with ember light. The creature was forcing its way out, cracking stone like rotten wood. Hurry, the man begged. Please hurry. We reached the top of the bluff as the creature erupted from the cave, roaring into the night sky, hollow eyes sweeping the desert. Its chest glowed again, faces pulsing, voices crying, memories stolen. It saw us, it inhaled, a gust so powerful it bent the tall desert grass flat. But we weren't trapped anymore. Not in its valley, not in its memory. The man grabbed a large boulder, shoved precariously near the cliff edge. Help me push. We shoved together, every ounce of strength, fear, grief, guilt pouring into our muscles. The boulder teetered, then toppled, plunging down the bluff with a thunderous crash. The ground shook. A second slab broke free. A third. An entire section of the bluff collapsed in a violent landslide, burying the creature in a cloud of sand and shattered stone. The roar that followed was unlike anything I'd ever heard, stretched with rage, torn with hunger, drowning in ancient disbelief. Then silence. Dust drifted, moonlight widened, air returned. We stood shaking, breath burning, eyes stinging. The man covered his face with both hands and sobbed, long, raw, human sobs that echoed across the desert. And for the first time in 29 years, I let myself cry too. Is it dead? He whispered eventually. I don't think things like that die, I said quietly. But maybe they sleep. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's enough. We turned toward the pale horizon, beginning the long walk back toward the world of the living. Behind us, buried beneath tons of stone, the desert went still again. But I knew, with a certainty I'll carry to my grave, it was listening. I didn't realize how easily a person could vanish in the American wilderness until the night I parked my old Volkswagen Westphalia at the edge of Brier Ridge campground, one of those places spoken of only in quiet warnings and half-finished stories. The kind where no one ever gives details, just a shake of the head and a muttered, "People get turned around up there." But the truth is, I wasn't looking for comfort that weekend. I was looking for clarity, though I'd never admit that out loud. All I wanted was a couple of nights under the pines to settle my thoughts, breathe something colder than the stale air of my apartment, and drive until my head stopped echoing with doubts I didn't yet have language for. Even now, thinking back, I can feel the way the silence hit me the moment I rolled in. Not peaceful silence. Not the soft, natural quiet that usually comes with places like this. This silence felt held as if the whole forest had taken a slow breath and paused. The campground road wound through oaks, twisted like old hands and pines so tall they seemed unwilling to let the fading daylight reach the ground. My headlights dragged across empty sites, neat concrete pads, unused fire rings, picnic tables scarred by weather and memory. But no people. Not a single other camper. I figured it was just the season. Midweek, early fall, temperatures dipping into the low 40s at night. Most folks didn't camp then. But I noticed something else, subtle but strange. Across several sites, tents were still pitched, some half collapsed, some zipped closed, their rainflies ruffling lightly as if someone had just brushed past them. Coolers sat open, chairs overturned. It looked as though campers had simply stepped away and never returned. At the time, I rationalized it. Maybe rangers had cleared people out for maintenance. Maybe folks had packed up in a rush. But deep down, a small voice tugged at me, whispering that something was off. I parked at Site 14, far enough from the trailheads to feel isolated, close enough to the gravel loop to pretend I wasn't completely alone. The sky was slipping into dusk, that hour when every shadow lengthens and your brain fills the gaps with what you want to see instead of what's actually there. I slid open the Volkswagen's side door, breathed in the cool pine air, and began setting up for the night. I'd barely started unpacking when another vehicle eased slowly down the road toward me, an old silver Tacoma with a spotlight mounted above the mirror. I straightened, instinctively bracing even though I didn't know why. The truck rolled to a stop near my sight, and the driver leaned out. Lean guy, late 40s, maybe early 50s, wearing a ranger jacket with no patches. "You camping here alone?" he asked, voice low, almost too soft for a man his size. I nodded. "Yeah, that a problem?" He scanned my van, then the trees behind me, then, strangely, the ground near the fire ring, as if expecting to see something there. "Just stay aware," he said. "People tend to wander at night around here. They think they're following the trail, but, well, things get confusing out past the ridge." "Confusing how?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Just don't go hiking after dark, and if you hear someone calling your name, don't answer. Sound carries weird in this forest." Before I could ask anything else, he tapped the roof of his truck with the flat of his hand and started rolling away, his spotlight sweeping over the tree trunks like he was searching for something he wasn't willing to name. When the taillights finally disappeared, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I'm not the type to get spooked easily. I'd camped all over the Southwest, slept in deserts that looked like Mars, woken up to coyotes sniffing at my bumper, even spent 1/4 of July trapped in my VW during a freak monsoon. But something about that man's warning, quiet, unpolished, unscripted, hit me in a place logic couldn't reach. Night came on fast. By the time I'd cooked a simple dinner and set my chair facing the fire, the treetops had dissolved into a single black mass overhead. The flames snapped sharply, sending sparks drifting upward as though the forest itself were exhaling them. I tried to relax, listening to the familiar crackle, the gentle hum of the VW's engine cooling behind me. But the quiet didn't settle. It hovered, too tight, too deliberate. Then I noticed something. A smell. At first I thought it was just campfire smoke shifting, but it wasn't. It was cold, metallic, like wet stone mixed with the scent of a cellar long sealed shut. The kind of smell that triggers something primal inside you, pulling your attention toward danger before your mind can name it. I stood slowly, scanning the tree line. The darkness felt dense, like it had weight, my ears strained, trying to separate natural forest sounds from imagined ones. A branch cracking far off, the faint rustle of leaves, the soft rush of wind, except there wasn't any wind. That's when I heard it. A tap. Sharp, subtle, deliberate. Coming from somewhere behind the Volkswagen. Not an animal scurrying, not a branch falling, a specific, singular tap, like knuckles against metal. I turned, heart thudding, but the van was just a silhouette in the dim glow of the fire. I waited, holding still, listening. Another tap, this one on the opposite side of the VW. Then another, closer as if something were circling. My breath tightened in my chest as a cold ripple crawled up my arms. I forced myself to call out, "Hello? Someone there?" Silence, the kind that seems to swallow your voice whole. I grabbed my flashlight, the patchless ranger's words replaying in my head. People tend to wander at night. Sound carries weird in this forest. Don't answer if someone calls your name. But this wasn't someone calling my name. This was something tapping on my van as if it wanted me to come look, as if it were checking to see whether I'd noticed it. I clicked on the flashlight and swept the beam around. The ground was untouched, no footprints, no movement, no animals darting away, just the corner of the van illuminated and completely still. I stepped closer, scanning the metal panel along the side. That's when I noticed them, 4 faint smudges, like fingerprints dragged downward, subtle but fresh enough that they hadn't dried or streaked. I swallowed hard. Okay, I muttered to myself, someone's messing around. But the logic didn't hold. No footsteps. No voices, no crunch of leaves, no distant laughter, no engine noise from other campers rolling in late. And even if someone wanted to prank me, why this site? Why a campground that was practically abandoned? The smell hit me again. Stronger this time, metallic, damp, wrong. I backed up, retreating toward the fire, trying to gather my thoughts. Everything inside me felt taut, stretched thin between rational explanation and a rising dread I couldn't push down. Then I noticed something else, something I should have caught earlier. Across the road at Site 16, a few feet off the gravel loop, stood a yellow tent I had assumed was empty. But now, with the angle of my flashlight, I could see its outline clearly. The tent wasn't just zipped closed. The entire front door was sliced, clean, straight down the center, as though someone had cut their way in or out. My pulse hammered. I aimed the beam inside, half expecting to see gear scattered around, maybe a sleeping bag, something to suggest normal use. But the tent was empty, completely empty, except for one thing. A pair of camping boots sat neatly at the entrance, lined up perfectly. Facing outward, facing me. A chill crawled across my skin. Something about the placement, the intentional symmetry, felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Boots don't stay that neat if someone gets pulled out of a tent. They don't stay perfectly paired if someone flees in a hurry. And they definitely don't sit untouched in a torn open shelter unless someone or something wanted them left behind. I backed away slowly, unwilling to turn my back on the tent. The fire popped sharply behind me, making me flinch, and the trees seemed to lean in closer, as though waiting for my next move. The tapping came again, this time from inside the tent, a soft, deliberate tap against the inner wall. Then another, slow, rhythmic, unhurried, like someone learning the sound of the fabric, testing it. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The tapping continued, steady as a heartbeat, each sound puncturing the silence like a needle. I didn't call out, I didn't move, because suddenly I remembered what the ranger had said. If you hear someone calling your name, don't answer. He didn't say anything about tapping. He didn't say anything about footsteps. He didn't say anything about what happens when the missing aren't entirely gone. And as I stood there, watching those boots in the doorway of an empty tent, I realized something unsettling. The tapping wasn't coming from the fabric. It was coming from somewhere lower, from the ground, from underneath it. I didn't understand what I was hearing at first. The soft, deliberate tapping rose through the soil like something buried was knocking back. Slow, patient, knowing I had nowhere else to look. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I tightened my grip, trying to convince myself it was just piping shifting underground or some trapped animal moving between roots. But the rhythm told me otherwise. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't random. It was intentional, like a finger pressed lightly against the underside of the earth. Tap, 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 tap. I stepped backward until the backs of my legs met the picnic bench. My mind kept trying to latch onto the safest explanation it could come up with, but there were no safe explanations left. The forest felt wrong, heavy, like the space between the trees had thickened, drawing closer, narrowing around me with every passing second. The fire beside me gave off heat, but the air around my shoulders felt colder than it should have been. Then the tapping stopped. A silence followed, deep, complete, and expectant, as if the forest was holding its breath with me. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. For a moment, I thought the sound had shifted into pounding footsteps, but no, it was just my pulse thudding against my ribs. I lowered the flashlight beam to the ground near the torn-open tent, scanning slowly across the forest floor. Pine needles, dirt, scattered leaves, no movement, no indentations, nothing emerging. But the boots, they weren't exactly as they had been before. They were still side by side, still facing outward, but they didn't look perfectly aligned anymore. One was angled slightly, only a little, but enough, like something beneath the soil had shifted them. My stomach dropped. I swallowed and forced myself to take a slow breath. Okay, I whispered to myself. Okay, think, don't panic. But panic was creeping up my spine anyway, slow, cold, relentless, because I realized something else. The tier in the tent had widened, not by a lot, maybe 2 inches. But it was obvious. The gap sagged open more than before. A small change, easy to miss. Except I knew exactly how it looked the first time I saw it. I remembered the lines. I remembered the angle. Something had been inside that tent recently, maybe within the last minute. A gust of cold air brushed the back of my neck. I flinched and spun, raising my light into the trees, but there was nothing. Just the suffocating curtain of darkness that felt like it was pressing down from every direction. Then I heard footsteps, real ones this time. Soft, measured, slowly moving along the gravel road that looped through the campground. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Not rushing, not stumbling, just walking at a calm, steady pace. Someone was out there. I backed up until my shoulder hit the side of my Volkswagen, pulse racing. The footsteps drew closer, approaching from the direction of the trailhead. I stayed silent, holding my breath, straining to see. The firelight flickered across the trees, casting long shadows across the road. The footsteps stopped just beyond the nearest picnic table. Hello? I called out before I could stop myself. My voice came out thin, unsteady. No answer. Not a sound. I raised the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the gravel, the ditch, the trees, the path. Empty. But the footsteps had been right there. I wasn't imagining that. I couldn't have imagined. I could still feel the vibration of the last crunch in my bones. Then something else happened, something that made the night tilt sideways. A low, muffled voice drifted from the forest to my left. A man's voice. Slow. Gentle. Almost tired. Is someone there? The words were calm, soft, not threatening, but they were wrong. Every instinct I had screamed that they were wrong, because they didn't sound like someone who needed help. They sounded like someone who was trying to lure. I stood frozen, staring into the dark. The voice came again, closer this time, but still muffled like it wasn't coming from a person standing above ground. Is someone there? My hands shook harder now. The ranger's warning whispered back through my head. If you hear someone calling your name, don't answer. He hadn't mentioned hearing someone call out like they were lost. Maybe he assumed that part was obvious. Maybe he didn't want to terrify me. Hey, I shouted before I could stop myself. Where are you? The moment the words left my mouth, the forest exhaled. An invisible shift, like the trees themselves were leaning in. Silence returned. But this silence was different than before. It was hungry. The voice didn't answer, but I could feel it listening. I scanned the tree line again, beam shaking erratically. The smell of wet stone thickened in the air. I could taste it now, sharp and metallic on my tongue. Then I saw something move. A shape slid quietly behind a tree, like just beyond the edge of the flashlight's reach. Not big, not small, human-sized. But the way it moved, too smooth, too slow, wasn't right. Like it wasn't stepping so much as drifting along the forest floor. A cold ripple swept through me. "Who's out there?" I managed, my voice cracking. The shape didn't answer. It didn't disappear either. It just shifted so slightly I almost thought the tree itself had changed shape. But I knew better. I backed toward the VW door, fingers fumbling for the handle. My mind was torn between staying still, climbing into the van, grabbing my keys, anything that might put a barrier between me and the thing watching me. Then something scraped beneath the Volkswagen. A slow drag, like nails scraping metal from the underside. My breath hitched. No. The scraping stopped, and two soft taps sounded directly under my shoes. Something was underneath me. I stumbled back so fast I nearly fell into the fire pit. My legs trembled so violently I had to brace myself on the picnic bench. Fear surged up through me, sharp and electric. The voice came again, closer now, almost right behind me, even though I could see with my eyes that nothing stood there. Is someone there? The trees seemed to shudder with the sound, like the voice vibrated through the bark instead of the air. My throat tightened, and a wave of nausea hit me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, anywhere, everywhere, just get out. But if I ran, I'd be running into the forest, into darkness, into whatever was drifting between the trees. I forced myself to move toward the van door again. My fingers brushed the handle and stopped, because something inside the Volkswagen shifted. Not loudly, just a soft, subtle movement, the sound of fabric brushing against the upholstery, a faint exhale of air. Something was in my van. My knees nearly buckled. I felt the blood drain from my hands, leaving them numb, useless. The window fogged over from the inside, one small patch like the breath of someone crouched low behind the passenger seat. I staggered backward, heart slamming so hard I could barely hear anything else. But I heard it anyway, a whisper. From inside the van, low, deliberate. "I'm here." And the whisper wasn't mine. It wasn't human, either. "I'm here." Those two words slid across the inside of my Volkswagen like a breath pressed through teeth that didn't belong to any human mouth. My spine locked. For a moment, my body forgot how to move, how to breathe. The whisper didn't echo, not in the way sound normally does inside a vehicle. It felt absorbed, swallowed, like the van had become a chamber designed to smother any noise that didn't belong. I stood frozen, staring at the fogged patch on the window. It pulsed again, one small bloom of condensation, as if someone exhaled slowly, patiently, waiting for me to open the door. My flashlight shook violently in my hand as I backpedaled toward the fire. The air around me felt sharp, brittle, like one wrong move would splinter the night into something I couldn't undo. "Okay," I whispered, voice shaky. "Okay, you need to think. Don't go to the van. Don't go to the trees. Just keep distance. Keep light." The fire crackled behind me, loud and sudden, throwing sparks upward like flares. The sound snapped me back into my body long enough to turn and face the campsite again. I wasn't imagining the danger. My brain wasn't making shapes out of shadows. Something was here. Something that didn't move like it should. Didn't breathe like it should. Didn't speak like it should. The air pressed down on me as if the whole forest was leaning its weight against my chest. My breaths came fast, shallow. I forced my eyes to scan the entire site, slowly, methodically, searching for movement, searching for logic, searching for anything that resembled normal. That's when I noticed the boots again. The ones left perfectly at the tent entrance. They were no longer side by side. One was gone. My breath stuttered. I swept my light across the ground, searching for where it might have been kicked or dragged or moved by an animal. Nothing. Just one lonely boot standing upright like someone had stepped into it and vanished before taking the next step. The tent's slit opening gaped wider now, flapping gently as though something had recently passed through it. The smell of wet stone thickened again, stronger this time, coating the back of my throat until nausea rose hot and bitter. "I have to get out of here," I whispered. Even saying it felt dangerous, like speaking the idea aloud made it more real. But the fear pressing into my ribs wasn't just fear of the thing in the trees or under the soil or inside my van. It was a deeper fear, the kind that comes when you feel the world narrowing, closing its grip around you, forcing you to choose between bad options and worse ones. If I ran to the road, I'd be exposed. If I ran into the forest, I'd be swallowed. If I ran to the van, I'd have to open the door. A soft thud hit the side of the Volkswagen. Not a tap, not a scratch. A thud, like a palm had pressed flat against the metal. I slowly aimed the flashlight toward it. 5 pale fingerprints appeared on the side panel. Clear, distinct, pressed outward. I clamped a hand over my mouth, choking back a noise I wasn't ready to hear myself make. Then the voice drifted from inside again, this time closer to the door, like the thing had shifted position. "You shouldn't have answered." My knees nearly buckled. I stumbled back, bumping into the picnic table hard enough to knock my flashlight off balance. It nearly fell from my grip. The voice inside the van didn't sound angry. It didn't sound cruel. It sounded regretful, as though it genuinely believed there had been another path, another outcome, another version of me who kept quiet instead of calling out into the trees. Footsteps sounded again, but not from the road, not from the forest. From beneath the soil, moving like something was crawling just under the surface, heading toward me in a slow, deliberate path. A shiver shot through me so intense it hurt. The footprints pressed faintly against the dirt, impressions rising from below rather than sinking from above. I backed toward the fire, every muscle shaking. The crackling flames offered the only comfort I had left: light, heat, movement. Proof of something natural still existing in this place. But then the fire shifted, not from wind, from weight, like something unseen had leaned over it. The flames bent, tilting sideways as if pressed by a hand I couldn't see. The logs popped violently, sparks shooting out in a wide spray. I jumped back, nearly tripping. A tall shadow stretched across the ground behind me, longer than any tree, longer than any person. It warped as it moved, its shape bending unnaturally, but growing thin and then wide as if it couldn't decide which form to settle into. "No," I whispered, stepping back again. "No, no." The air went strangely quiet. Even the insects stopped. The forest, the ground, the fire, everything held still. Then a calm voice spoke from directly behind me, a voice that didn't belong to any living thing. "You're on the wrong path." I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the smoke. Nothing. No figure, no person, no animal. Just the warping shadow sliding slowly toward the base of the nearest tree. I aimed the beam at it. The shadow froze, and for a split second, just one, I saw something inside that darkness. An outline, a rib cage, fingers that were far too long, a face, if you could call it that, angled like it had been broken and reset poorly over and over again, and beneath that face, eyes. Not glowing, not bright, just watching. Empty. Human-shaped, but not human. I stumbled back again, like flashlight jerking wildly across the trees. Then a howl shattered the night. Not a wolf, not a coyote, not anything I'd ever heard. It started low, almost gentle, then stretched upward into a pitch that twisted inside my skull. I slapped my hands over my ears, dropping the flashlight at my feet. It hit the ground and rolled, beam spinning wildly across trunks and branches. The shadow snapped away from the tree. The howl cut off instantly. Silence returned so fast it left a ringing in my ears. I bent down to grab the flashlight, fingers trembling so violently I could barely close them around the handle. That's when the ground in front of me broke open. Not a full collapse, not a pit, just a crack. A long, thin fracture splitting the earth like something underneath was pressing upward, testing the surface. My flashlight beam steadied on the fissure. The dirt shifted, and slowly, so slowly it made my skin crawl, one pale fingertip poke through. Not clawed, not decayed, just a fingertip, smooth, human-like. except it had far too many joints. I stumbled backward until I hit the Volkswagen again, but the moment my back touched the metal, something pressed against it from the inside, a face, pushing the curtain outward, shaping the fabric. I didn't look. I couldn't. The whisper came again, right at my ear this time. You saw them wander. Push in life, you don't leave now. My vision blurred, my breaths turned shallow and ragged. Everything inside me screamed to run, fight, scream, anything, but my legs wouldn't move. The forest around me pulsed with an invisible pressure. The fire dimmed. The shadows thickened. The ground quivered beneath my feet. Then the crack in the soil widened another inch. The fingertip curled, and another appeared beside it. 2 fingers. Then 3. Then a whole hand, thin, colorless, too flexible, pressed up through the soil like it had been waiting for this exact moment to surface. My breath snagged in my throat. Every cell in my body screamed to run, but my muscles fought themselves, paralyzed by the primal instinct that movement would trigger something I couldn't outrun. The hand writhed once, stretching the skin at its knuckles like rubber, then began testing the ground above it, pushing outward against the crack. The scent of wet stone hit me with full force again, so sharp it burned the back of my tongue. I stumbled away from the Volkswagen, away from the widening split in the earth. But I didn't get far, because as I backed up, I saw something else. The empty tent, its flaps still lightly swaying, now had a shadow inside it, not cast from anything outside, not shaped like the boots. A new shadow. Tall, bent, waiting. The fabric shivered like something brushed against it from within. The zipper jangled, a soft metallic tremor that didn't belong to wind. My chest tightened. Tears blurred my vision. My mind was trying to rationalize, trying desperately to find some explanation rooted in the natural world, but everything I saw pushed against logic until my thoughts fractured into panic. A low hum vibrated through the campsite, so faint it was almost below hearing, like a distant generator running underground. The crack in the soil widened. The tent quivered. A ripple ran across the shadow inside it. The fire sputtered. Every sense in me locked onto that hum. It pulsed, steady, rhythmic, as if answering the tapping I'd first heard beneath the ground. My heartbeat synchronized with it for a terrifying second, my pulse thudding along with the vibration until I felt swallowed by something older, deeper, something that didn't belong in any forest. Then, the whisper came again, this time from the ground itself. You called to us. I staggered backward, legs shaking so violently I nearly fell. My breath hitched and caught in my throat, a high, panicked gasp that sounded like it came from someone else entirely. No, I choked out. I didn't mean to. You did. The voice slipped through the soil, through the trees, through the air inside my van. Everywhere at once, but always quiet, as if it were conserving its strength. A long crack echoed through the campsite. The ground trembled. The hand beneath the soil flexed again, bending in a way no human hand should ever move. I turned toward the road. The narrow path that led back toward the ranger station was only 50 yards away, maybe less. But the moment I looked at it, the shadows on either side seemed to thicken. The darkness shifted, gathering like something was aware of my intent. If I ran, I wouldn't run alone. Then the tent zipper began to open, slowly, deliberately, teeth separating one by one. The shadow inside moved, taller than before, stretching the fabric as it leaned toward the opening. My legs finally reacted. I stumbled back another step, boots crunching gravel, breath hitching in sharp, shallow gasps. Inside the Volkswagen, something moved again, louder this time, a scrape of fabric, a shift of weight, a breath that fogged the window a second time. I was surrounded. Forest, ground, tent, van. A cold wave of realization washed over me. This wasn't random. This wasn't an attack. This was a pattern. The missing campers, the abandoned tent, the untouched food, the boots placed neatly side by side, all of it orchestrated, all of it deliberate. None of them had run. None of them had screamed. None had been dragged. They had been lured. My instincts twisted into something sharper than fear. Clarity, even if it was horrifying. I wasn't dealing with an animal or a person or anything that followed the rules of living things. I was standing inside something's hunting pattern. Something that didn't chase, something that waited, something that liked when you stepped toward the wrong noise, the wrong question, the wrong voice. "You shouldn't have answered," the whisper repeated inside the van. The tent zipper reached the end of its track with a soft click. The flap sagged open. A figure crouched inside, its limbs too long, its spine arched like it was made of rope instead of bone. Its head lifted slowly into the beam of my flashlight. Skin stretched over a face that hadn't decided how to settle, features shifting and rearranging like wet clay. 2 eyes gleamed, not glowing, just reflective, like something deep underground had learned how to mimic them. I stumbled back, almost tripping over a rock. My lungs burned. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the light. And then the soil cracked again, louder, wider, faster. The hand beneath the earth clenched into a fist, pushing upward, straining for air. Another hand emerged beside it, fingers twisted, joints clicked, a shoulder pressed against the dirt, stretching the split wider until the ground looked ready to tear open like rotten fabric. The humming rose in pitch, vibrating through my bones. The tent creature crawled out on all fours. I gasped and stepped back again, but the shadow from the forest moved too, gliding along the tree trunks like a smear of ink stretching toward me. My legs finally broke free from the paralysis. I ran. Not toward the van, not toward the tent, not toward the fire. Toward the only place that still had open space, the center of the campsite. It wasn't safety, but it gave me distance. It gave me sightlines. It gave me seconds. I skidded into the clearing, chest heaving, flashlight swinging wildly across the trees. The humming sharpened. The hand beneath the soil broke through completely, dirt exploding outward. A pale arm shot up, grasping blindly at the air. The tent creature crept forward, limbs bending too many ways. Its breath rattled like something caught in its throat. My Volkswagen rattled violently from the inside, as if something was clawing at the walls, desperate to escape, or worse, desperate to join the others. A new voice echoed through the campsite. Not a whisper this time. A chorus. Dozens of overlapping voices speaking as one. "You saw the trail they left behind." I turned toward the road again, hoping, praying for movement, for headlights, for anything, but the shadows lining it tightened, merging together until it looked like the entrance to a cave. "You followed their path," the voices continued. The soil creature pulled itself further out, shoulders, then a neck, then a head that tilted toward me without lifting. "You answered their call." The tent creature stopped 10 feet away, head twisting at an unnatural angle. "You stepped where they vanished." The Volkswagen stopped rattling. The ground hummed. The forest stilled. "You are part of the trail now." My lungs seized. My vision blurred. Everything inside me demanded I run, but the road ahead pulsed once like a heartbeat and the shadows thickened. No escape forward, no escape behind, only one direction left. But the moment I turned toward the woods, every tree seemed to inhale. I continued walking toward the edge of the clearing, every step slow and deliberate, as if any sudden motion might shatter the fragile quiet around me. My breath hung in the cold air. My flashlight's beam trembled across the tree trunks, catching on strips of bark that looked almost peeled by hand. The forest around the campground didn't feel alive, not in the normal way. It felt watchful, expectant, like it was bracing for whatever came next. I kept thinking about the footprints, how they'd staggered off into the dark as if someone had been dragged or stumbled or tried to flee blind. I kept replaying the fact that the tracks had stopped at nothing, no trail, no debris, no body, only the imprint of a man who'd vanished in mid-stride. And somehow I knew the forest wanted me to see it. I raised my voice quietly, not quite a whisper, not quite a call. "Alex, if you're out here, just talk to me. I'm not here to make trouble. I'm just trying to figure out what happened." The silence answered, thick, heavy, like the woods were swallowing the sound as soon as it left my lips. Somewhere to my left, a soft crack echoed, not a branch breaking, not a footstep, something lighter, almost inquisitive, like a finger tapping on wood. I turned my flashlight. The beam settled on a tree about 20 feet away. One of the lower branches had a perfect circle carved into it. Not a symbol, just a circle, the size of a coin, but impossibly smooth, too smooth to have been cut by a pocket knife. It looked burned, blackened at the edges, like someone had pressed something heated into the trunk until it sank in. I stepped closer. My pulse picked up. I'd heard stories about rangers in the Northwest finding strange carvings on trees, but this wasn't that. This was something different, something more deliberate, something that felt like it wasn't meant for people, yet was placed exactly at eye level for us to find. I lifted my fingers, but I didn't touch it. My instincts were screaming at me not to. Behind me, a soft metallic clink echoed through the clearing. I spun. My Volkswagen's passenger door was slightly open. I knew, without question, I had closed every door. "Who's there?" My voice cracked. The cold lodged itself deeper into my chest. No answer. I took 2 steps toward the van as my flashlight cutting through the shadows. My breath quickened as I approached the open door, half expecting someone to be sitting inside. But the interior was empty. Only one thing was different. My map, folded earlier and tucked neatly between the seats, lay open across the passenger chair, and someone, or something, had drawn a line across it in thick charcoal, tracing a path away from the campground and deep into the forest, a path that didn't exist on the actual map. A path that ended at a point circled multiple times, right next to the words "Lost Trails." My stomach dropped. When I'd arrived earlier that afternoon, one of the old campers, Grace, in her 70s but sharp as a knife, had mentioned something offhand while tending her small fire. Something I'd brushed aside as local superstition. "Stick to the marked camps," she'd said. "This place has more footpaths than you'll see on a map, and not all of them stay put." At the time, I thought she meant the typical, unmaintained routes, those narrow side trails you find in older campgrounds that rangers don't bother to update anymore. But now I stood there staring at a line on my map that I hadn't drawn, leading straight into the trees where Alex had disappeared. My throat tightened. This wasn't an accident. Someone had been inside my van without making a sound. No footprints, no marks, no shifting of gear. Just a line, a direction, an invitation. Or a warning. I reached for the map, my hand shaking slightly, when a voice spoke behind me. "You shouldn't follow it." I nearly jumped out of my skin. Spinning around, I lifted my flashlight, its beam falling on a woman standing 10 yards away. Grace. Her layered jacket looked heavier now, coated with frost. Her eyes held a sternness I hadn't seen earlier. "You're still awake?" I breathed. Why are you out here?" She lifted one hand slowly, like she didn't want to startle me. I heard something moving between the sights. Figured it wasn't an animal. Figured it might be you. "You saw someone?" I asked. She shook her head. "Sight ain't what you need around here." I didn't know if she meant that literally or metaphorically. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd lived long enough to know exactly when to be afraid. Grace glanced at the open map inside my van. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Did you draw that?" "No." "Then you need to close your doors and stay inside the van," she said. "Whatever path that's pointing you toward, it doesn't lead anywhere you want to be." I swallowed. "What happened to Alex?" Her look softened, but her answer didn't come quickly. She stepped closer, her boots crunching softly in the frosted dirt. "People like to pretend disappearances in the woods have simple explanations," she said quietly. "Weather, wildlife, getting lost. But sometimes people follow things they think are real. Lights, voices, trails that didn't exist the night before. They see something familiar. A cabin they swear they passed an hour earlier, a person who looks like someone they know, and they step off the safe ground." My breath thickened. "You're saying he followed a fake trail?" "I'm saying this place remembers every mistake made in it," she said, "and it repeats them." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. She motioned for me to close the van door. "Lock up, try to rest, leave at sunrise, don't wander, and whatever you do, don't follow anything you didn't see with your own eyes." I nodded, but something in me was still locked on the drawn line, something magnetic, something I couldn't name. Grace's gaze lingered on my face. "You're thinking about going, aren't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She sighed deeply. Curiosity is what keeps people alive in cities. In forests, it's what gets them taken. With that, she turned and walked back toward her campsite, her footsteps careful, disappearing into the dark. I stood there another moment, staring at the map, at the circle around the point labeled Lost Trails. Something about the handwriting bothered me. It wasn't charcoal, it wasn't ink. It looked like the line had been burned into the paper. My hands shook as I folded the map and shoved it deep into the glove box before slamming the door shut and locking it. Locking it. I got into the driver's seat, locking every door manually, then sat still, listening, watching the mirrors. The trees swayed in wind I couldn't feel inside the van. The campground's fire pits had gone quiet, except for one, Grace's flame, flickering low in the distance. I lay down in the back of the van, pulling my sleeping bag up to my chest, telling myself I'd leave at sunrise, that I wouldn't go looking for answers, that I wouldn't follow anything that led into the woods. But around 3 a.m., something tapped against the side of the van. Once, twice, 3 times, soft, perfectly spaced, like someone knocking with a fingertip. I held my breath. The knocks traveled from the sliding door to the rear hatch to the opposite side, slow, precise, circling me. And then they stopped. The night went dead silent. I didn't move. I didn't breathe until something slid under the driver's side door, a thin strip of paper, its corner barely visible from my angle. My chest tightened. I crawled forward slowly, reached out with one shaking hand, and pulled the slip of paper toward me. A single sentence was written on it. I didn't follow it. It followed me. My heart froze, and beneath the words was a single fingerprint, blackened, burned, not human, not possible, yet unmistakably real. My throat tightened as the truth settled like ice inside me. Whatever took Alex wasn't just out there in the trees. It knew I was here. It knew my name, and it had already begun to circle closer. The first thing you learn out here, long before you understand weather patterns or how to level your rig on a slope, is that fear isn't loud. Fear doesn't crash into your campsite like a bear or scream your name from the woods. Fear is quieter than that. It's the dry click of a branch snapping when the night's too still for anything to be moving. It's the way your breath catches before your mind decides if something's wrong. And sometimes fear is the story someone else told you long before you ever stepped foot in the Appalachians. My name's Marcus Hale. I'm 43 years old, born and raised in a flat, wind-carved part of Kansas where the biggest danger you'd run into on the road was a tumbleweed smacking your bumper. But somewhere between my mid-30s burnout and my need to feel like I hadn't wasted my life behind a desk, I bought a used Class C RV and pointed it east. I'd heard everything. Every fear-soaked warning about the Appalachian Mountains that people love to spit out like gospel. Strange disappearances, vanishing hikers, shadowy figures that walk the ridge at night. People swear these mountains watch you back, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious. But curiosity is cheaper than therapy, and sometimes it drives you farther than common sense ever could. The first time I camped in the Appalachians was just outside Clinch Mountain, Tennessee. I parked at a small, uneven campsite tucked between a ridge and a creek that murmured like it had secrets it didn't quite trust you with. Locals at the gas station told me not to camp there after sundown. They didn't smile when they said it, didn't laugh to show it was a joke. One old man didn't even look up. He just shook his head and muttered that the ridge had a way of getting into a man's bones. But here's the truth. Most of the so-called dangers people warn you about are built out of things they didn't really understand, strung together by stories that outlive the people who started them. And I didn't know that yet. Not until I learned it the hard way. That first night, the air crawled colder than the forecast predicted. The Appalachians can shift temperature like they're flipping a coin, warm, cold, and you never know what you're going to get. I stepped outside around midnight because something felt off. Not wrong, but different. The kind of different that makes the hairs on your arms lift because your body knows something your mind doesn't. The woods were almost too quiet, no crickets, no owls. The creek still ran, but the sound of water felt distant, like it had moved 5 miles away in the time I'd been sitting inside reading. People always talk about the noises that scare them while camping. The growls, the footsteps, the snapping twigs. But silence is worse. Silence is the thing that gets inside your head. Then, just when that silence felt thick enough to choke on, I heard a sound I didn't expect. 3 soft taps, not fast, not slow, not random. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from the ridge, way up the slope, maybe 100 yards from camp, not the creek, not the trees shifting. A human rhythm, the cadence of someone thinking, someone waiting. I froze. Every instinct in me wanted to rationalize it. Woodpecker? Falling debris? A branch hit by the wind? But the air was still, empty. Even the leaves felt like they were holding their breath. I called out quietly because speaking too loudly in the dark feels like asking for attention you're not sure you want. Hello? Nothing. Just the silence slipping back into place like a door closing. I returned inside, locked the door, and laughed at myself even though it wasn't funny. That's what we do out here. We laugh to pretend we're not afraid. We joke to hide the tremble in our hands. But the tapping stayed in my head long after the night settled back down. The next morning, I drove into town and mentioned it to a man at a small diner, the kind where everyone already knows what you're ordering because they saw your RV roll up. He looked at me, wiped his hands on a towel, and shrugged. "That's just the mountain cooling," he said. "Cooling?" I asked. "Ridges crack, rocks settle. Sounds like tapping sometimes. Folks hear it, think it's something more." And that right there, that moment, was my first lesson in Appalachian threats. Not everything strange is dangerous. Not everything dangerous is supernatural. And not everything supernatural is meant for you. But fear doesn't care about logic. Fear doesn't care about geology or temperature shifts or rock expansion. Fear follows its own rules. And even after that explanation, a part of me didn't buy it. Because I knew what I heard. And it didn't sound like rocks cooling. Still, I was stubborn enough to stay another night. By the second evening, the clouds were stacked low, like the sky was crouching over the ridge. Fog began slipping through the trees earlier than usual, dragging the cold with it. The Appalachians have a particular kind of dusk, one where the last bit of daylight drips away slowly, not disappearing but dissolving, as if something in the woods is tasting it. I cooked dinner outside, listening to the creek bubbling behind me. And the whole time, I felt that same wrongness from the night before. Not loud, not sharp, just a slow tightening in the back of my mind, like the air was paying too much attention. Around 9 p.m., I noticed something strange. The fog was moving uphill. Fog doesn't do that. Fog settles in the low places, in valleys, in dips of the land. It doesn't climb. But this fog, it crawled up the ridge, threading through the trees like it was following a trail I couldn't see. And the higher it went, the quieter the creek sounded. My chest grew tight as I watched it. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. The Appalachians are known for strange weather patterns, sudden shifts, dense humidity. That's what every guidebook says. That's what the locals shrug off because they've lived with it long enough to stop noticing. But fear listens to your instincts more than your logic, and my instincts were telling me the ridge wasn't finished with me. Still, I told myself I needed to be braver than my imagination. I didn't drive hundreds of miles to let a bit of fog unnerve me. So I did what any stubborn RV camper does when something feels wrong. I stayed put, pretending nothing bothered me, pretending the air wasn't too still, pretending the shadows between the trees weren't gathering faster than they should. I wanted clarity. I wanted truth. I wanted to understand why people talked about this place like it had its own kind of hunger. But wanting clarity doesn't guarantee comfort. By 10:30, the fog had swallowed the ridge entirely, but the tapping hadn't come back. I kept telling myself that was good news, that I'd been overreacting, that the diner guy was right. Then, right as I settled onto my bed, something new happened. Something small, almost gentle. A knock. Not on the door, not on the window. The knock came from under the RV, a single deliberate thump against the frame, right below where my feet were. I shot upright, breath slicing out of me. My first instinct was danger. Animal, person, something mechanical failing. But deep down, a heavier thought pushed into my mind. Whatever tapped on the ridge last night had learned where I slept. My legs trembled, my throat tightened. I stayed completely still, listening. Silence. And that was somehow worse. I sat there, waiting for the next sound, knowing the Appalachians weren't the kind of place where things knocked twice. And in that silence, thick enough to smother, one thought burned through everything. Maybe the locals weren't warning me about monsters. Maybe they were warning me about the things we convince ourselves aren't real. Didn't sleep after that. Not with the memory of that single deliberate knock echoing through the floor of my RV like it was something alive and patient. I sat there with my back against the bedroom wall, knees pulled up, listening for anything, any shuffle, any scrape, any hint that whatever touched the underside of my rig was still there. But the night stayed painfully, unnaturally quiet. Here's the thing about RV camping in places as old as the Appalachians. The silence doesn't act like silence anywhere else. It presses on you. It closes in. It asks questions you don't want to answer. And that night, I realized just how much of fear is shaped by the stories we carry into the woods, not by the woods themselves. I thought about the locals' warnings, their way of lowering their voices when the mountains came up in conversation, their refusal to make eye contact when I mentioned where I was camping, the way the diner owner said, "Folks hear things and think it's something more." But the truth was starting to unfold in ways they didn't explain. Because I hadn't heard something, I had felt it. And feeling is harder to rationalize. Around 3 a.m., when exhaustion tugged at me harder than the fear did, I finally turned off the lights and let myself ease back onto the mattress. The air inside the RV had grown stale and damp, like the fog had found its way in through the seams. Every breath felt heavier, but my eyelids sank whether I wanted them to or not. I must have drifted off for a few minutes, maybe longer. But when I woke up again, I wasn't alone. I didn't hear anything first. I smelled it. Damp earth, wet leaves, something faintly metallic like rain on rusted metal. It lingered just a few inches from my face. I kept my eyes closed, not because I was brave, but because I was terrified that opening them would make something I couldn't handle real. My heartbeat thudded violently against my ribs, each pulse tightening the fear in my throat. It took everything I had to crack my eyelids open. Nothing. No shadow, no figure, no imprint on the floor. The air was perfectly still. But the smell didn't go away. That's when I understood something I should have realized earlier. Not all Appalachian stories are about what people see. Some of them are about what people sense, right before they realize they're being watched. I sat up slowly, every muscle tight enough to snap, and scanned the interior of the RV. It felt smaller than it had the day before, like the walls had crept an inch closer. My breath fogged faintly in the beam of my flashlight, even though the temperature inside wasn't cold enough for condensation. Something in the environment had shifted, something subtle, something wrong. And here's where my rational mind kicked in, the part of me that came to the mountains to find clarity, not fear. I told myself it was humidity, temperature fluctuations, the creek, the insulation, the scent of the fog outside slipping in through the vents. Because the alternative was the kind of thing you don't admit sober. So I waited until sunrise before stepping outside. The fog had mostly lifted, pulling back from the ridge like a tide receding from shore. The ground was wet from dew, and tiny droplets clung to the undercarriage of my RV. I crouched down, running my fingers along the frame where the knock had come from. Nothing was damaged. No dents, no paw prints, no mud. No sign of anything crawling under there, but the earth beneath it was disturbed. Not torn up like an animal had been digging, not scuffed like someone had crouched there, just pressed, as if something heavy had rested its weight against the soil for a long time. A chill ran through me, but right behind it came something else, curiosity. The The same curiosity that brought me to these mountains, hoping to separate the real dangers from the made-up ones. And so far, the line between those two was getting blurrier by the minute. I spent most of that day hiking the nearby ridge trail, partly to clear my mind, partly to gather information. The Appalachian woods in daylight feel nothing like they do at night. Everything's green and open and humming. Birds call, squirrels chatter, the wind slips through the branches like a quiet melody. It's almost peaceful enough to convince you the night before was your imagination. Almost. I reached an overlook with a view of the valley, layers of blue mountain silhouettes stacked like folded blankets. I stood there breathing in the thin, crisp air when a voice behind me said, "You camped at the creek, didn't you?" I turned to see a man in his late 60s, tall, shoulders bent like he'd been carrying weight longer than most people have been alive. He wore a flannel shirt, torn at the cuffs, and carried a hiking stick, polished from years of use. "Yeah," I said. "I'm down there by myself." He nodded once. Slow, thoughtful. "People hear things down by that water," he murmured. I waited for him to continue. He didn't. "What kind of things?" I finally asked. Instead of answering, he looked at the ridge behind me, eyes squinting like he was trying to make out something far away. "You staying another night?" The question didn't sound like small talk. It sounded like a warning wrapped in politeness. "I was planning to," I said. Another slow nod. "Then don't sleep with your windows open." A cold ripple spread through me. "Why?" He tapped the end of his hiking stick against the ground 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. My stomach clenched. "Echoes," he said. "Sound travels strange around these parts, bounces off the stone, makes you think things are closer than they are." It was such a simple explanation, rational, logical, the kind of answer you cling to because it feels safe. But something in the way he said it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like a man trying not to tell the whole truth. He nodded once more, then headed back down the trail without another word. I stayed at the overlook for another 20 minutes, letting the wind clear my head, but the whole time the rhythm of those taps looped through my mind. Tap, tap, tap. Not an echo, not stone cooling, not imagination. Something had touched my RV. Something had leaned close enough in the night for me to smell the earth on it. Something had watched me sleep. But fear has a strange way of pulling you deeper instead of driving you away. And instead of packing up, I walked back to camp determined to face whatever this danger was, natural or not. Maybe it was a person, maybe it was an animal, maybe it was a trick of the mountains, bending sound and scent in ways science barely understands. But part of me wanted answers. And that part, as I'd soon learn, would push me even closer to the heart of what people mean when they talk about Appalachian threats. Threats that aren't monsters or myths, but something older, quieter, and far more patient. By late afternoon, the fog began gathering again, earlier than the day before, thicker too. Like it had been listening, waiting to return. I sat outside by the fire pit, watching it roll in slow waves between the trees, swallowing the ridge inch by inch. The air cooled fast enough to make my breath visible, and every now and then I swear I heard something move within it. But not footsteps, not animal sounds, breathing. One long, steady inhale. Not human, not close, but deep, like the mountains themselves were waking up. My heart thumped unevenly. My grip tightened on my coffee mug. The sun dipped behind the ridge. Just like the night before, the silence fell hard. Then, somewhere above the fog-covered slope, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Not far, not distant. Much closer this time, and as fear crept up my spine like cold water, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The tapping wasn't random. It wasn't warning me. It wasn't threatening me. It was calling to me, learning my rhythm, studying my reactions, closing the distance, and the night wasn't even close to over. The fog thickened fast that night, too fast. Like it had been waiting just beyond the tree line, watching for dusk, and the moment the light died, it surged forward with intent. By the time I stepped back inside the RV, the entire world outside my windows had vanished into a milky, shifting blur. I couldn't see the ridge, I couldn't see the creek, I couldn't even see the fire pit I'd been sitting beside 10 minutes earlier. It was as if the mountains had closed a curtain. Inside the RV, everything felt too quiet again. I tried turning on some music, something low, something steady, but the sound felt wrong, too artificial, too loud in the wrong way, like the fog outside was listening for anything unnatural, so I turned everything off. I sat in the dark with only the dim glow of the stove light above the sink. My heartbeat was the only rhythm in the room. For a long time, that was enough. For a long time, fear stayed quiet enough to manage. But the mind never stops working in silence. It fills it, it colors it. It makes shapes out of shadows and stories out of your own breathing. And just when my thoughts began drifting towards sleep, I heard it. Not tapping this time. Dragging. Something long and heavy slid across the ground outside, pulling through the dirt with a sound so slow, so steady, that it made every muscle in my shoulders stiffen at once. It wasn't an animal. Animals are quick. Even large ones move with some kind of rhythm. But this sound moved like it wasn't concerned with distance or time. A slow pull, a pause, another pull. I stood frozen in the middle of the RV, afraid that even shifting my weight might draw attention. I held my breath for so long my lungs ached. Another drag. This time closer. My first thought was that someone was out there. Some person trying to mess with me, or maybe someone living off-grid and unhappy that I'd camped nearby. But no human moves like that. No human drags something without adjusting, without grunting, without slipping or shifting. Whatever was moving outside moved too deliberately. I crouched down and peeked through the thin slit at the bottom of my window shade, but the fog swallowed everything. I couldn't see more than a few inches of the ground. Even the dirt looked blurred. Another drag. And then a sound that was somehow worse. Something tapping lightly, not on the ridge this time, but on the side of the RV. Tap, tap, tap. It was the same rhythm, the same spacing, the same eerie patience. Only now it was feet away from me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where would I go? Into the fog? Into the woods? Into whatever was out there? My mind slammed between possibilities, person, animal, tree branch shifting in the wind, but every rational thought felt flimsy, like a tent flapping in a storm. So I did the only thing I could do. I waited. The tapping stopped, replaced again by that dragging sound, moving from the side of the RV toward the back. I forced myself to breathe quietly, slowly, each inhale trembling in my chest. I pressed my ear to the wall, feeling the faint vibration of the movement outside. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural exhale, not animal, not quite human, something in between. I stumbled backwards so fast I hit the small table behind me. The sound outside went still, as if whatever it was had heard me. Silence, pure, dangerous silence. I didn't move another muscle. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I focused on listening, on feeling, on sensing whether the weight of the world outside had shifted. A full minute passed, then 2, then 3, long enough for fear to settle into my bones like cold water. Then the sound retreated, soft at first, a drag, a pause, another drag, fading slowly toward the creek, until finally, nothing. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. But I stayed awake long enough to watch the first gray threads of dawn slip through the fog. Only when daylight softened the edges of the world did I step outside. The ground around the RV was disturbed, not ripped up, not trampled, just swept. A wide, smooth arc curved from the woods to the edge of the creek. Not footprints, not paw prints, just a single streak through the dirt like something long had been pulled along the ground. I crouched and touched the earth. It was cold, wet, packed in some places as if tremendous pressure had been applied, but not enough to leave a shape. I followed the drag mark toward the creek, but right before it reached the water, it stopped, clean, abrupt, like whatever had been moving wasn't limited by the landscape. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that broken trail, long enough for the fog to lift completely, long enough for 2 birds to start singing in the trees as if nothing had happened. And part of me, the rational part, the part that wanted to believe horror could be explained, considered packing up and leaving. But another part of me wasn't ready, Because fear doesn't just chase you away. Sometimes it demands understanding, and I needed to understand. So instead of leaving that morning, I drove 10 miles into town to visit the same diner, the same man who had warned me about sound travel and echoes. When I walked in, he looked at me like he already knew why I'd come. "You didn't sleep much," he said without a smile. "No," I admitted. "You heard things." "Yes," he nodded like he had been expecting that answer for years. "You smell anything?" I hesitated. "Wet dirt? Rust? Like something old?" That made him flinch. Barely, but enough to notice. "You're camping where you shouldn't be camping," he said quietly. "But the locals didn't explain why," I pressed. "They just warned me." "They warned you," he said, wiping his hands on that same towel planet, because folks don't agree on what it is. And when people can't agree on something, they call it superstition, or danger, or myth. Depends on who you're asking. "What do you call it?" He hesitated for a long moment, then breathed through his nose like he was picking his words carefully. "I call it the Ridge Echo." I waited. He didn't continue. "What does that mean?" I asked finally. He leaned across the counter, lowering his voice. "There are places in these mountains where sound doesn't behave the way it should. Places where echoes repeat things you didn't say. Places where the earth itself remembers footsteps long after they're gone." I frowned. "That doesn't explain what I heard." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." He straightened, his jaw tightening with a seriousness that made the diner feel colder. "Some echoes," he said, "don't bounce back. They come forward." I didn't understand. Not fully. Not yet. But he could see the confusion on my face, so he continued. "You heard tapping the first night, right? Up on the ridge?" "Yes." "That's where it starts." He tapped the counter with his knuckle, 3 times in the exact rhythm I'd heard both nights. When the ridge calls back what the earth remembers, it sounds like someone tapping on stone. I swallowed hard. "And the knock under my RV?" His eyes drifted past me, toward the window, toward the mountains beyond it. "That means it found you." Something cold coiled inside my stomach. "What is it?" I whispered. He shook his head slowly. "I don't know," he said. "Some folks say it's the land, some say it's memory, some say it's just the mountains breathing. But what I do know is this." He leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't like people sleeping alone." A chill slid down my spine. "And it's always quiet before it gets close." I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because fear does that. It makes you reach for anything to soften the truth. But he wasn't joking. His eyes held a kind of old worry, the kind you only earn from experience. "Should I leave?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. "You should have left after the first night." He paused. "But if you're going back, you need to know something else." I braced myself. "It doesn't follow everyone," he said. "But if it learns your rhythm, your breathing, your heartbeat, your footsteps, it becomes curious." My pulse quickened. "And once it's curious," he finished, "it doesn't stop." His words sat heavy between us. There was no exaggeration in them, no attempt to frighten me, just truth delivered by someone who'd seen more than he wanted to. I walked out of the diner with that weight in my chest, the kind of dread that sits deeper than fear. The kind that feels personal. And the mountains, they look different now, not threatening, not welcoming, just patient, as if waiting for my return. I drove back toward camp with the diner owner's warning echoing louder than the mountains themselves. Once it learns your rhythm, it doesn't stop. The phrase replayed over and over, syncing with the thrum of the RV's tires on the winding mountain road. But fear does something strange when you're alone in places like this. It doesn't push you only toward escape. Sometimes it pushes you toward answers. Questions become claws digging into you, refusing to let go until you scratch back. So instead of rerouting toward the highway, I turned onto the narrow gravel road leading to my campsite. Returning was a mistake, but leaving unanswered fear behind would have haunted me more. When I pulled into my spot by the creek, the air was unnaturally still again. No wind through the trees, no rustle in the leaves, not even the bubbling creek gave its usual voice. The land held its breath like it sensed I'd brought the diner owner's words back with me. I stepped out of the RV slowly, half expecting the drag marks to reappear or new ones to snake toward the woods. But the ground was clean, too clean, like something had smoothed the earth while I was gone. I walked toward the spot where the drag line had stopped the night before. The soil was untouched, undisturbed. Whatever had moved through here hadn't come back during the day. At least, that's what I told myself. I spent the afternoon scanning the area, checking for signs, footprints, broken branches, disturbed water, anything that could rationalize what happened. But the mountains don't give answers easily. They give hints, fragments, pieces of truth you're supposed to assemble on your own. By early evening, the fog had not yet returned, but the temperature dropped fast, like someone had pulled a plug on the warmth. My breath clouded in front of me long before twilight. That alone was unusual. Fog follows humidity and temperature change. Cold air this early. It was the kind of shift that didn't match any weather forecast I had checked. The sun carved long gold lines across the ground before slipping behind the ridge. As shadows stretched, the air tightened. I could feel it, this invisible pressure like the atmosphere thickened just enough to slow every movement. I cooked dinner on the portable stove outside, determined to act normal, determined to face whatever was happening without letting fear narrate every second. But the moment the first stars appeared overhead, the silence fell again. Not natural quiet, not peaceful quiet, dead quiet. No insects, no birds. The creek began to trickle so faintly that it sounded like it was receding underground. I swallowed, my ribs tightening around my heartbeat. Then, without warning, a single sound cracked through the silence. Tap, tap, tap. Not from the ridge this time, not from beside the RV, but from everywhere. Like the mountains themselves were tapping back. Each sound echoed through the air, delayed by milliseconds, bouncing from slope to slope, trees to stone, creating a layered chorus of taps that surrounded the entire campsite. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't random. It was mimicking something. Me. My footsteps from earlier, my pacing by the creek, my hesitation outside the RV door. It had learned my rhythm. I felt my stomach hollow out as I backed toward the door of my RV. My hand trembled on the handle, the sound following me as I climbed inside and locked the door. The tapping grew sharper, closer, more distinct. I dimmed the interior lights. The windows glowed faintly with the fogless night outside, but the tapping created an invisible boundary around me. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it through the nearest window. Nothing. I checked the other window. Nothing. Then I reached the back window, the one closest to where the knocking had come from the night before. As the beam cut through the darkness, something shifted at the far edge of the fog, not clearly visible, just a distortion, like the air had thickened into a shape that wasn't supposed to be there. Something long, too long, standing unnaturally still. My breath caught, fogging the glass as I leaned closer. I blinked. The shape disappeared. The tapping stopped instantly. Silence dropped so suddenly it felt violent. Then, a new sound. A low, deep creak from beneath the RV. Wood under strain, metal flexing. The unmistakable vibration of weight being applied. The thing was underneath again. My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in my teeth. I backed away from the window, gripping the counter with sweaty fingers. The RV groaned. Not a mechanical groan. A pressure groan. As if something was lifting the frame from one side. I dropped to the floor, pressing my ear to the vinyl, listening. Something shifted underneath me, slowly dragging itself from the rear axle toward the center. The vibration crawled through the floor like a cold hand sliding beneath skin. I scrambled back up, panic roaring white-hot through me. The diner owner's voice pounded through my mind. It doesn't like people sleeping alone. I'm not sleeping, I whispered. I'm awake. I'm awake. I'm awake. The RV lifted another fraction of an inch on the left side. Just barely. But enough to make every dish in the cabinet rattle. I braced myself against the wall, heart slamming. Then, a second sound joined the first. Breathing. Not from underneath, but from outside the door. Slow. Steady. Inhale. Pause. Exhale. Like something was learning the rhythm of my panic, I froze. Even my lungs refused to move. The breathing drew closer to the door, pacing outside with an eerie patience. I could hear it stop, then shift, then stop again, like it was matching its timing to mine. I covered my mouth with both hands to muffle the sound of my breath. Every muscle locked tight. The breathing stopped. Complete stillness. Then, a whisper. Right through the door. Not a voice made of words. A voice made of rhythm. 3 soft taps. Tap, tap, tap. My knees buckled. I stumbled backward, knocking into the kitchenette. The entire RV shuddered as the thing beneath shifted again, my vision blurred with tears I didn't even remember forming. The whispering tap repeated. Tap, tap. The same rhythm it had learned, the same pattern I'd walked, the same pace of my fear. And for the first time, I understood what the locals couldn't say directly, because saying it aloud would make it real. The thing out here wasn't hunting. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't lost. It was mimicking, echoing me. And echoes don't stop unless something breaks the pattern. I should never have stayed, I whispered. The breathing outside the door stopped instantly, like it understood me. The tapping ceased. The dragging under the RV quieted. Everything fell silent again. But the silence wasn't comforting. The silence felt like a choice, like it was waiting for me to make the next move, waiting to see if I was going to break the rhythm or let it learn more. I stood there, chest trembling, trying to convince myself I had any control left. But in the stillness, one truth settled deeper than anything else. Whatever people call Appalachian threats isn't about monsters hiding in the woods. It's about the land remembering you. And once it remembers you, it wants to keep learning. I stood there trembling in the half-dark of the RV, listening to a silence so absolute it felt predatory. The breathing outside had vanished. The dragging beneath my feet had gone still. Even the fog seemed to hold itself at bay, lingering at the tree line as though the world had frozen mid-movement. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to grab my keys, turn the engine over, and blast down the mountain road without looking back. But fear does something strange when you've gone too far down its path. Once it roots in your chest, it doesn't push you toward escape. It pulls you deeper. It numbs your survival instinct just enough to make curiosity feel like courage. And that's exactly what happened to me. Because instead of running, I found myself whispering into the silence. What do you want? My voice felt too loud in the dead air. Loud enough to draw an answer. Loud enough to feel like a mistake. Nothing responded. But the quiet shifted. Not with sound, with pressure. Like the atmosphere tightened, pressing gently against the walls, as if the night itself was leaning in to listen. I realized then that the diner owner had been right. This thing wasn't chasing me. It wasn't trying to scare me off. It was observing, learning, like a child tapping on a fish tank, trying to see if the creature inside would react. And that thought, that image, terrified me more than any monster hiding in the dark could have. I forced myself to breathe, slow, controlled. But even those breaths felt like invitations. I could imagine the unseen presence outside memorizing the rise and fall of my chest, measuring it, matching it. I slid down against the kitchenette cabinet, sitting with my arms wrapped tight around my knees. The vinyl floor was cold, grounding me just enough to keep panic from swallowing me whole. Minutes passed, then 10, then maybe 20. It was impossible to tell time when your heartbeat was the only measure of movement. Eventually, I realized something strange. The longer I sat still, the calmer the air around me felt. The pressure eased, the quiet grew less suffocating. The darkness outside the windows stopped feeling like it had shape, almost like my stillness was confusing it. So I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe any louder than a whisper. I waited. Then something subtle shifted near the front of the RV. Not a sound, not a vibration, just a feeling. A change in the way the air moved. A ripple, gentle but deliberate, like something brushing past the front bumper. My skin prickled as the sensation crept along the side of the RV, slow enough that I could follow its path in my mind. It stopped beneath the bedroom window, right below where my head had rested the night before. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening so much the swallow almost didn't go down. The air pressed inward again. lighter this time, like curiosity had replaced aggression. A soft, weightless sound floated up from beneath the floorboards. Not dragging, not tapping, breathing, but not in the same rhythm as before, no longer mimicking me. This breathing was shallow, fragile, like something trying to hold itself very still so it wouldn't startle me, something trying to learn quiet. I covered my mouth with both hands to stop the sound I almost made, a choked, terrified gasp. My pulse slammed like a drum in my throat, but I didn't dare move. The breathing stayed there for a long moment, a presence without shape, a weight without form, just listening. Then another sound drifted upward from the same spot, not from lungs, from the earth, a faint rumble, deep, resonant, like stone shifting far below the surface. The RV vibrated barely as if the land itself exhaled beneath me. My heart skipped. This wasn't an animal. This wasn't a person. This wasn't anything that belonged to biology as I understood it. This was the mountain, remembering me, echoing me, drawing closer with each rhythm it learned. The rumble faded slowly, dissolving back into stillness. I stayed frozen, waiting for the next sign, the next sound, but nothing came. The silence returned, and this time it felt neutral, not threatening, not welcoming, just watchful. And then, without warning, the fog outside the windows began to move, not drift, move. It parted in a straight line from the tree line to the edge of the creek, revealing a narrow path of visible ground, as if something invisible had brushed through it, carving a channel in the mist. A cold ache spread through my chest. I crawled toward the nearest window, keeping my movements slow, wary of drawing attention. I lifted the curtain an inch and looked outside. The fogless path ended directly at the edge of the creek. A perfect line. Clean. Deliberate. And the dirt at the end of it had been disturbed again, swept lightly as if something had paused there, waiting for me. I let the curtain fall. This wasn't random. This wasn't mindless. It was intentional. Everything it did was intentional. And that was when something inside me cracked. Not in fear, but in understanding. All those stories about Appalachian threats, the legends of missing campers, strange lights, echoing voices that didn't belong to any living thing, they weren't about danger. They were about memory. Because these mountains weren't alive in the way we think of life. They were alive in the way that old places are alive, through pattern, through echo, through rhythm. And when something alive in that way finds a new pattern to study, a new rhythm, a new presence, it latches onto it. It doesn't chase you. It doesn't stalk you. It learns you. That realization pulled me out of my paralysis, because suddenly leaving the RV felt more dangerous than staying inside. If I stepped out there, if I disturbed that path it had created, if I moved the wrong way, it would learn a new rhythm. Mine. Fast. Fearful. Exposed. And I couldn't risk that. Not anymore. I backed away from the window and sat in the center of the RV where the floor felt the most stable. I focused on steadying my breathing, slowing it to the calmest rhythm I could manage. If it was listening, if it was learning, then I needed to teach it stillness. Minutes passed, then more. Eventually the pressure eased again. The air warmed, the atmosphere loosened its grip, and the fog outside the windows slowly slid back into place, closing the path it had carved. Just before the last of the clear air disappeared, I heard one final sound drifting from the tree line. Tap. Tap. Soft. Measured. Almost. Gentle. Then the night swallowed it completely. I sat awake until sunrise, listening to nothing but the tiny clicks and creaks of the RV settling. I didn't dare move, didn't dare sleep, didn't dare breathe too deeply. And when dawn finally arrived, painting the woods gold and breaking the tension in the air, I made my choice. Not out of panic, not out of cowardice, but out of understanding. The danger wasn't that the mountains would hurt me. The danger was that they could learn me so completely that I'd never leave. I began packing. I began packing in the gray-blue quiet of early morning, moving slowly, carefully, as if the mountains were still half asleep and I didn't want to wake them. Every zipper I pulled, every latch I snapped shut, every object I lifted felt too loud in the fragile stillness. But nothing stirred outside. Nothing answered. Nothing echoed back. The air was warm again, warmer than it had been in days, like whatever had pressed against me last night had released its hold. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees in long, soft beams, and the creek had regained its usual voice, flowing with steady, familiar noise. If someone walked into my campsite at that moment, they would have laughed. They would have said I'd imagined everything. They would have told me the mountains were just mountains, that fog was just fog, that silence was just silence. But I knew better. I felt better. Or maybe worse. I loaded the last bag into the RV and paused at the door, looking back at the creek. The ground where the path had appeared was undisturbed, smooth as if nothing had ever touched it. No drag marks, no swept trails, no impressions in the dew. It was as though the night had wiped itself clean. I hesitated, 1 foot inside the RV, 1 foot on the step. The air around me felt normal again, but normal in a way that felt borrowed, temporary, like a kindness extended only because I had stayed still long enough to earn it. I started the engine. For a moment, I thought I heard something shift along the ridge, just a faint settling of stone or the soft roll of a loose pebble. I held my breath, listening. Nothing followed, nothing mimicked. I eased the RV onto the gravel road, and for the first time since arriving, I felt the land watching me not with hunger, not with curiosity, but with the quiet patience of something ancient that understood I was leaving. The road twisted through dense woods, the early sun catching on moss-covered trunks and sparkling in the puddles left by the fog. I passed the small overlook where I'd met the old hiker, the trailhead sign, the broken fence near the bend. Each familiar landmark felt different now, like pages I'd read once and understood in a new way the second time through. By the time the asphalt replaced gravel and the road widened, my shoulders had finally begun to loosen. The tension in my jaw had faded. The tightness in my ribs eased enough that I could breathe fully again. And that's when I saw the deer. A doe stood in the middle of the road, still, silent, facing me. Sunlight outlined her shape in gold. Her ears flicked once, but she didn't step aside. I slowed the RV to a crawl. Her eyes met mine through the windshield, dark, calm, strangely knowing. Animals in the Appalachians have that look sometimes, like they've lived long enough to recognize the patterns the rest of us miss. I waited for her to move. She didn't. A minute passed, maybe 2. Then, instead of bolting into the brush, she took 1 slow step to the side. Deliberate, measured, almost rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. Not her hooves, her steps. Matching the pattern I'd heard for days. My blood went cold. Not because the deer was threatening, not because she moved strangely, but because she was echoing something. Echoing me. Just like the ridge had. Just like the breathing had. Just like the tapping outside my RV door. It wasn't the deer I knew. It wasn't an animal learning a pattern. It was the land speaking through whatever form it chose. I drove past her slowly, my breath caught between awe and fear. She watched me until I rounded the next curve, and the trees swallowed her from view. Only then did I exhale, and only then did I realize something else. Leaving wasn't the end of it. The road straightened, leading out of the mountains, but the silence inside me deepened. Not dread, not panic. Something heavier, something reflective. I had come here to debunk myths, to separate truth from fear, to understand what was real and what was rumor. But the danger in the Appalachians, the real danger, isn't the stories people tell. It's the stories the mountains tell back. I reached the next town by late morning, a small place with a single gas station, a hardware store, and a mural painted on a brick wall showing layered blue ridges beneath a pale sunrise. I pulled into the station, filled the tank, and stepped inside for coffee. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with laugh lines and tired eyes, looked at me a little too long before speaking. "You camping up there?" she asked, nodding toward the mountains. "Yeah," I said. "Just left." "Everything all right?" I hesitated. People in towns like this know things they'll never put into words. So I didn't lie. "I heard some things," I said carefully. "Saw some things." Her expression didn't change, but something softened behind her eyes. "You're leaving now," she said. It wasn't a question. It was an understanding. "Yes," I said. "That's good," she replied. When the mountains start noticing you, it's time to give them space. I stared at her. Her voice wasn't fearful. It wasn't dramatic. It was respectful. You've heard stories? I asked. She shook her head. Everyone hears stories, she said. Stories don't matter. She glanced toward the window. But feeling it, that matters. My throat tightened. What happens if you stay too long? I whispered. She handed me my change and met my eyes. The same thing that happens when anything wild gets used to you, she said gently. It stops letting you go. I walked out of that gas station feeling something deeper than fear, something like reverence. The kind of reverence you feel after stepping too close to something vast and unknowable. Driving west, the mountains shrinking in my rearview mirror, I thought about everything I'd come to the Appalachians believing. The dangers people warn about, the myths they pass around campfires, the fears blown out of proportion, exaggerated for dramatic effect. And then I thought about everything I'd learned. Not monsters, not cryptids, not ghosts, the land itself. Watching, listening, learning. And the real danger, the one nobody tells you because it doesn't fit neatly in a story, isn't that something out there will hurt you. It's that something out there might understand you too well. See you too clearly, remember you when you leave. Because some places, old places, quiet places, don't forget the people who move through them. They echo them, they carry them, they repeat what they learn in subtle, eerie ways. And if you stay long enough, you start echoing back. As the last outline of the ridge disappeared behind me, sunlight spilled across the plains, warm and unburdened. The pressure in my chest finally released. The world felt wide and open again. But even now, months later, sometimes, when the house is quiet, when the night is still, when a distant sound repeats just a little too cleanly, I feel that mountain air in my lungs again. And sometimes, late at night, I hear it. Tap, tap, tap. Faint. Measured. Patient. Not threatening. Not chasing. Just remembering. Just echoing. A reminder of the truth. The real dangers of RV camping in the Appalachians aren't the ones they warn you about. They're the ones that follow you home, quietly, curiously, waiting to see if you'll ever return.